Okay, so we have a quorum, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. There's an agenda that's posted outside the chambers. It didn't have the proposed capital budget on there, but it's on the posted agenda. So I just want to make sure that I've gone through the budgets for IT, human resources, finance. They're pretty. I think we might have time to get to capital, so I want to make sure, just because it's not noted on this agenda that's posted outside, I want to make sure the committee knows that if we have time, we will start looking at capital today, if that's okay. Okay, so with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Oh, wait, we need a roll call. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Roll call, please. Here. Councilor Rivera's on his way. Okay, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, we have a motion second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, so our first department is going to be the ITT department. Mr. Joshua Alicio will be here. Ms. McCoy, I have a quick question. As we get started on IT, going to the line items, the first 3 pages, they're blank from FY18 to FY20. And so I assume that's just a cleanup to show FY17, and those categories have changed since then.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, so if we can turn to page 4 of the spreadsheet, unless there's questions on page 3 by the committee. There are a couple of items on 3, but nothing recommended, and they're all based on FY18. So I don't know that it'd be germane to this year's budget. But on page 4, I have a question, Mr. Alicio, on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the 8th line, data processing, operating expenses. In FY17, it was $173,130. FY18, it was $32,000, and now you're requesting $130,000. Can you explain just briefly what that's about?
Mr. Chair, I sure do appreciate the opportunity. Mr. Mayor, committee members, councilors, appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. So with regard to that, Councilor Abeyta, and if I recall, that there was a question regarding that that the IT department had received an additional $2 million during the FY17-18 budget year. What we had did that particular year is that we did something called IT allocation, which was essentially trying to bring in anything that had a chip or anything that had an application to it under our purview. And there was a couple reasons why we did that. Number one was to ensure that whatever was an IT perspective, that we were going to control the actual deployment of things, number one. And number two, to make sure that we had a good project management schedule of what was coming into the city of Santa Fe. And number three, ensuring that we had the right resources to ensure that we had support for those particular projects that were coming in. During that FY 17-18, we saw success in the fact that that IT allocation had proved to be justified, and we were able to get all of those projects, or the majority of the projects, under control from that perspective. As we moved to FY 18 and 19, we wanted to focus on the foundational aspects of what IT was going to pursue. There were 3 major projects that we had focused on at that point in time frame. Number one, it was the Office 365 upgrade, which essentially was going to convert a 12-year-old system into a modernized system that we see today. Number two was the mobile device management tool. In that mobile device management tool itself, we wanted to accomplish 2 things. Number one, we wanted to ensure that we had asset management down to the T, which we're in the process of doing today. The second part of that, we wanted to ensure that any asset that got fielded in the city of Santa Fe was going to be GPSed. That way, we could be able to control not only the device itself that the city is paying for, but to be able to ensure that security was built into those mobile devices. And the last item that we had was something we would call the information technology server management tool, which is upgrading our 12-plus-year-old help desk system. So those were the three major initiatives that we've had during the FY 18-19 year, and that's why we see that delta there, is that we had IT allocation that bumped us up 1.7 million, and of course the 300,000 for the three major projects that we wanted to focus on from a foundational standpoint was all that we were able to handle during that time frame.
Okay, so again, on page 4, the 8th line, you're requesting 130,000 for data processing.
Yes, that's correct. And so in that one there is one of our special projects that we have, which is the Endpoint infrastructure project. Basically, we're in the midst of modernizing our cabling system, modernizing our switches, our routers. We currently have 40 right now that are 10-plus years old, and we have a number of locations. Out of the 42 locations that we have approximately 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4 sites that still have to be outfitted with current wiring technology to be able to offer the necessary bandwidth.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee regarding any of the line items on page 4 of the budget? Okay, I didn't have any questions. Sorry, Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. This actually may be a question for Ms. McCoy, because I see a major shift in terms of transfers out. In page 4, we've got 3,131,000 capital transfers out. You know, in the cover sheet, we've got a 28,000% increase, what it seems to be saying, transfers to other funds. And so kind of we've changed the approach, obviously, on how the money moves through IT, and perhaps you can give us a little explanation on that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes, I would be glad to give you that explanation. That's one of the larger increases, line item increases, that we'll see in this year's budget. That is because we're taking a different approach with the enterprise resource planning system and how we're budgeting it. If you notice in the far left columns, it's being funded from the 0.5% GRT fund.
Right, that was,
And this is the transfer that you will see for the ERP program for the duration of FY20. I believe also in your packet there should be information on those expenses, on that 3.1 million specifically, and how it's broken out between the categories. If you remember from the mid-year budget, we allocated half a year of salaries, which totaled about 300,000, and then the remainder of the funding for the current year was for contractual services. And the same pattern continues forward into FY20, except for you'll see a doubling of the personnel costs, because instead of funding the positions that are dedicated to the ERP program for half a year, you'll see it increase almost double, it's a little over doubling for the entire fiscal year, and then the continuation of the contracts being funded out of the 0.5% GRT fund.
right, you know, that as a percentage basis, that I mean, that's only 9,636%. But basically, it's all around the ERP and how we approach that in terms of funding and accounting for it, staffing it, and things, and those issues. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I didn't have anything on page 5. Did anybody have any questions regarding any of the lines on page 5? On page 6, Mr. Licio, kind of halfway, right in the middle, there's software subscriptions. There's quite a reduction from 113 in your base budget this year down to, I guess, $750.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the question on that. So as part of our IT allocation, we did a couple things. One important item that we did is we here in IT, we don't support the 100-plus applications here in the city. We support a percentage of those applications. And so the allocation itself ended up going into the different departments' budgetary line items. So Anything that IT supports will come into our subsidiary codes. Anything that we don't support will stay within the department budgets.
Okay, and that's the cause for the reduction.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and then two more lines down, there, general liability department assessment, we're going from 94,000 down to 59,000. What's the reason for that? And it says insurance as the subcategory.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
That is the risk insurance assessment that is assessed to all departments and divisions. It is the primary fluctuating driver in that is claims for the prior year, although it's based on the number of vehicles we have, the amount of square footage we have, basically our costs of running the risk management function, as well as the claims function.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions regarding any of the line items on page 6? Anything regarding page 7? Okay, page 8. I don't see anything on page 9. What about page 10? On page 11, Mr. Alicio, I have a question regarding your software subscriptions. You might have touched on that in your opening. That's the change from the 1.5 million, then last year it was 2.2, and now we're at 2.4.
Yes, that is correct. My original statement stays the same on that one.
Okay, great. Any questions from the committee? Councilor Harris.
Thanks for asking about subscriptions. That was on my list, and I've heard the answer. So one of the things, Mr. Alicio, that we've talked about as various departments sit here is, in fact, I've asked Ms. McCoy for kind of a summary document by department regarding training and what I would call, not tuition, but professional, I prefer to call professional development. And you've got different line items here. I don't know how it, what the aggregate is. At the bottom of page 11 is one of the higher dollar amounts, $27,600. But give me a brief summary. Give us a brief summary, if you would, of the department's approach to training and professional development. Do you feel like you're adequately funded? The department's adequately funded for that? And is it how much of it's just for department personnel? How much of it is for other departments and support as we transition with different equipment and different systems?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, that I do truly appreciate that question. One of the things when I took this chair a few years back, I focused on 3 major initiatives, and education was one of them. I'll give an analogy. If we have a dental issue, we want to make sure that we go to a dentist that has DDS behind their title. And I view that in a sense to where, wow, this is feedback. Move this over here. And I view those titles to be very important because when we look at information technology, we're looking at workstations, routers, servers, highly technical type of technologies that require very specific skill sets. And so what I sent out to do was to make sure that we did, number one, a full assessment on everybody's capabilities, all 33 FTEs, their capabilities to be able to manage and maintain the systems that we have today and what will be coming in the future. We did identify some challenges, and those challenges are, number one, we're supporting over 100 plus applications. Number two, some of the technology that we have been implementing are cutting edge technology. Virtual servers, for instance, that require specific skill sets. That doesn't grow on trees out in the industry other than in cutting edge type of organizations. And so my guys set out whether it was a manual in hand or whether we sent them to training to be able to gain those knowledge skill sets. And we have reaped the benefits of them putting in some very modernized type of technology that we have here within the city itself. So I'm a huge proponent of education. We're looking at establishing a $2,500 per person within our staff to be able to get educated, to be able to get certified in specific areas, i.e. on our help desk, to be certified Security Plus, Network Plus, and from our network operations team to be Cisco certified. So these titles are extremely important because it does tell our customers, our constituents, our staff members, that we know what we're doing. And again, it is a educational involvement that we have been engaged with, because technology does change very, very quickly. In 1 year's time, there's new technology out there. There's new capabilities. There's new ways of how to do business with technology itself. And it is extremely important that my staff understand not only that factor, but keep up with the technologies itself. What we don't want to fall into here at the City of Santa Fe is hiring individuals that are 2-3 years behind in technology, because then we get into that cycle of refresh rate, which we struggle here within the city historically. I.e., in my opening statement, we have 40 endpoints, router switches that the gazintas and the gazautas of the internet that are 10 plus years old, and are essentially prohibiting us from really reaping the benefits of ensuring that we have the maximum bandwidth to be able to do business here. And when you bring in new technology, you bring in new services, you bring in those benefits. And so my staff, they have to be certified, they have to be educated. Otherwise, our staff here doesn't reap those benefits. The city doesn't reap those benefits when we start our refresh plan every 3 to 5 years, every 5 to 7 years in technology. And that has been one of the struggles that we've had here, is not only just the antiquation of the equipment, but antiquation in knowledge. And it has really put some of our staff members that have been part of IT for a while in a very, very tough and challenging position. Basically, they've had to go out and get a manual and read a manual of 1,000 pages to understand new equipment that's coming in. And that's a disservice. And I want to make sure that my staff is trained, that they're educated, and they can provide the proper service to the city of Santa Fe.
Thank you. That's a very complete answer, and I appreciate it. A complete answer on at least internal to IT. But to what is within your department's budget also monies for taking that knowledge and spreading it throughout the various departments, or is that found elsewhere in HR? But certainly there's, as you know, there's training, there's education throughout the city as you bring different equipment and processes on board. So are those monies and that responsibility within your department, or is it elsewhere?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I can only speak for myself. I'm sure Ms. McCoy would be able to add to that, but looking at my budget, it is for our staff.
For your staff.
However, second part of that is that we have an initiative ongoing right now where we're setting up a city training center where we can actually exploit, again, that type of knowledge base to our city staff members here within the city itself, giving our staff who are certified, who are educated, to be able to educate our staff here. And we're calling it the Center of Excellence.
Okay. All right. Maybe when we get to HR, we can talk about this issue. We received a very clear answer about training, but it's the monies that are in the budget, as I understand. I'm going to give you back your words, are really for your staff.
As I understand my budget, and Ms. McCoy can correct me if I'm wrong, it is for my staff.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, page 12, are there any questions on page 12? Page 13. On page 14, Mr. Lucio, 4 lines down, you have for communication, increase of $16,000. I mean, it's not much, but what gets covered at that line item?
I'm pulling that up right now. This particular, Mr. Chair, this particular item right here is to compensate for our projected costs for further mobile devices, telecommunication devices, in this one here. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is where we put under communications itself. We are seeing a trend upward of more mobility and more needs for mobility here within the city itself.
Okay, and then at the very last line on page 14, you have an increase from 644,000 to 992,000 for data processing.
So this one right here, Mr. Chair, is one of our special projects, and that special project is our Windows 10 upgrade. If you have taken, staff have taken note, we're still on a antiquated.
We need him on the microphone.
You'll need to maybe move the mic so that the recorder can pick it up. Yeah,
I apologize, just the feedback there. So we're running a Windows operating system which is approximately mid-2000s. And here we are in 2019. And so this particular line item right here is compensating for what we need to be putting in place by January 2020, which for Microsoft as a company, they will stop support for Windows 7. So we're in the process of migrating to a newer operating system due to that lack of support. And of course, this is well overdue.
okay, are there any other questions regarding any of the line items on page 14? And then, page 15, there's nothing proposed. So if I look at your recommended FTE count, you currently have 33 positions, and you're going to stay with 33 positions. So you're not proposing
Mr.
any
Chair,
addition.
that is what has been budgeted, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for general questions for a few minutes from the committee, and then I'm going to request a motion. Let's start with committee member Lindell. Do you have any questions for Mr. Elicio?
The only question I have wouldn't be appropriate for here would be how for me to use my new email, but I'm going to learn how to do that. So no, I'm striving for excellence with that, and I'm going to get it. So I do appreciate the responsiveness of the guys when I'm sitting in my office with a box of tissues. They're really so kind about it. But I know we're making a lot of progress, and I just want to say thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Alicio, on your main information technology expenditure summary, there's a services to other departments that's $10 million. And then in the departments themselves, they have services of other city departments, and like Chavez Center is budgeted at $308,000. Are those what makes up the $10 million?
Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is correct. That's what makes up the $10 million. And that's part of what we had called the IT allocation. And because we are supporting the Chavez Center, we're supporting other locations, that is in our budget.
Ms. McCoy, how come there's no services of other city departments in this budget? I assume they use HR as well as some of the other services, but I didn't see it in the IT budget or the HR budget.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, one of the questions that Counselor Harris had brought up was services to other departments. I do believe it's in there.
But Councilor Harris
If
always
you-
one step ahead of me.
like the general liability assessment, page 6.
No, the
Benefits
services to other city departments. would-
They are not a enterprise fund, is why. Only the enterprise funds are charged HR, finance, but they are charged for insurance, they are charged for general liability, they are charged for benefits. But because they're not an enterprise fund, they do not pay, is that correct, Andy?
Yes, there are a couple of exceptions. There are a couple of special revenue funds that are funded by lodgers tax that pay for those general fund services, but other areas do not, because it's kind of like you get into an endless loop of allocation back and forth, and a decision was made quite a while ago that general fund departments, for example, would not pay for general fund services because it's a lot of work for no real gain anywhere.
All right, so I'm looking at a Parks and Rec budget that we already approved. It says General Fund, Recreation Division, Services of Other City Departments, $304,719.
In that case, that would not be for general fund services, that would be for the IT and fleet costs attributable to them. Because remember, all three of those go into one line item. The general fund services, the IT services, and the fleet services are in one line item, and we use subsidiary codes to tell them apart.
So then it's only enterprise funds and a few others.
That pay the general fund services, yes. Everyone pays the IT costs, except IT, of course, because then you get into that same endless loop situation where IT is paying an assessment for their own costs. But yes, IT, basically every dollar in the IT budget is either charged directly to departments, to divisions per se, like transit match routing software. When IT maintains that type of piece of equipment or software or whatever it is, it will be in their budget, and it will be a direct assessment to transit. And that's part of their assessment. The rest of their assessment for things like personnel, for general costs, for administrative costs of IT are broken out to all departments based on the number of user accounts they have as a share of the whole. A similar thing happens in vehicles, in fleet, but of course with a different methodology. It's based on the number of vehicles that a particular division may have, the type of vehicles, because bigger trucks tend to be more complicated, more expensive to work on, and the age of the vehicles. And those three come together in like a point scoring system. So, if you have an older vehicle, if you have a really complicated vehicle, if you have if you have more vehicles in general, you'll have more points and therefore more share of the total fleet costs, which again are just like with IT, are 100% allocated out to them.
So if there's no services of other city departments from within the general fund, how do they purchase IT equipment?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, there are actually you will actually see services for other city departments in the general fund for the IT and fleet costs. And what happens is they'll get with IT, say, we need to buy some. This.
I get how it works. So like in HR, there is no services of other city departments. So does that mean they don't utilize or they don't have any IT needs for this next fiscal year?
I'm not sure about that. I thought that there was a charge to them, but I'd have to go back and double check.
Maybe there is. Maybe I just missed it, but I didn't see it initially. So, Mr. Alicio, will you explain how the process works then from if a department head wants to purchase, 10 new computers, how does that process work?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, I appreciate that question. Again, this goes along the IT allocation. What we've done in the past is that we put in a refresh plan, a 5 to 7 year refresh plan for workstations. What we've done is we've taken the head count of users within various departments. We've taken 1/5 of those head counts and came up with a formula to be able to refresh older systems. So every year we take that 1/5 budget with regard to that head count, and we apply that cost under a subsidiary code for IT allocation. So every department will be refreshed on a yearly basis until there is a modernization of the equipment.
I guess how much say do they have in that part of the budget that's, I guess, theirs, but you guys manage?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, if I understand your question, number one, it's their money. And number two, we always propose that plan as far as recommendations are concerned, meaning you may have a 7-year-old system, and we coordinate with them during budget, and so as we move into the next cycle itself, they know what to expect, whether it's a workstation, mobile devices, etc.
And if there's any deviations that need to be made or something happens unexpected, are those factored in?
Yes, those are factored in. So if we have Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, so if we do have a department that comes in and says, hey, we need money for, let's say, more laptops or a mobile device or what have you, again, that's their money. We make recommendations as to what those tools are, and it's part of the refresh plan that we have instituted.
And I guess you guys keep track then of what hasn't been purchased due to unforeseen circumstances and then come back the next year with additional recommendations?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is correct. So we try to exhaust those funds because of where we're at today. This is our second year of our refresh plan. We still have over 400 endpoints that we're in the process of modernizing. So we're very keen as to what departments have what. And we ensure that we are working with the departments, especially now towards the end of this budget cycle, to ensure that we will expend those funds, that they get the modernized technology that they put in their budgetary lines.
It seems a while back there were purchases made that then the IT department was not able to support because they weren't involved in the process of the purchase. Has that improved? Have you seen that improved over the last few years?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, we've seen a great improvement that we moved to a IT allocation type of methodology. We've seen a great improvement with regard to communications, IT with finance, with water, with public works. It's a partnership that we have been fostering for the last couple of years. It's still improving today, and we want to make sure that IT is supporting them in their needs. As we plan for the future, the one thing that I've emphasized to the city in general is that we've got to have infrastructure in place first. We have to modernize our equipment first before we actually go out and start building these elaborate type of applications, i.e. in this particular case with ERP. When ERP went out, we had to take a look at the two separate initiatives, one to ensure that bandwidth, infrastructure, and modernized equipment were going to be in place as the ERP was being deployed. So that's a huge initiative. We always have to take a look at what type of technology is being deployed to support whatever departments are needing at that point in time. So we have seen a collaborative effort improve, and we're continuing to see it improve. And our objective this coming fiscal year is to not only close the gap of the modernization of all of our equipment here, which in my calculation has probably never been done here at the City of Santa Fe, but we will have all of our IT equipment and user services, networking, cabling, will be modernized to the 2019-2020 standards. And then at which point we will continue to build upon the vision and mission of what the IT department is going to do in supporting the city.
Any other questions, Councilor Rivera? Councilor Harris.
Asked and answered, but I also want to echo Councilor Lindell. Very much appreciate the assistance I get, not only on Springer Road, but on occasion here. Tremendous attitude and very helpful and good problem solvers.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry if I may, Councilor Harris. Again, this is a testament to this team stepping up. And we appreciate those compliments, and it really does give us that confidence to keep pressing on a daily basis and to achieve two objectives. Number one, to ensure that we're supporting our customer. Number two, to ensure that we have communications at any given time. Thank you.
Counselor Romero Worth. Counselor Vihil Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi. You may have covered this, but I want a little bit more discussion from you about the city's vulnerability to security breaches.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, that I do appreciate it. Very, very close to my heart. So a little bit of history, if I may. Coming on board as the first information security manager here at the city, we set out as an IT department to identify what you just stated. What are our vulnerabilities here? And how are we going to manage it? How are we going to maintain it? And taking a look at that, we had to establish a framework. And that framework is based on federal standards, meaning that we take a look at what we call confidentiality needs, integrity needs, as well as availability needs. And all of those have technical controls, whether it's password protecting something, whether it's classifying data that should not be released until it's authorized to be released. So there are a number of security controls that are out there that we're basing on from a federal level perspective. And so when we came on board, or I came on board working with the IT staff, we wanted to institute something called security and defense. So basically, we wanted to look at where information was coming in, and in this particular perspective, what we would call a gateway. Then it would hit our firewall, and then it would hit our internal routers and switches, and then it would hit our workstations, emails, applications. And so we ran through the gamut from everything that I just explained, the gateway, all the way down to the wire itself. And again, everything has a security control, and we manage and we monitor those security controls on a regular basis. We are still building our security posture, and we continue to monitor vulnerabilities that come out on a daily basis. How does it affect our city? How does it affect our devices? So it is a constant cat and mouse game that we are playing. I'll give you a for instance of what we are working on today, or what we have implemented. We implemented what we call a visual map of the entire city's data network. So we could see this map at any given time. And in this particular map, it's everything from our firewalls to our servers to our routers. When it's green, we know it's up. When it's red, then we take action and we take a look at, is it a network issue or is it a security issue? We also monitor trends, and we do analysis here as well. Part of the trends and analysis is what is actually happening to the city. And so we are seeing one major item, which is called phishing. So phishing is essentially a bad guy sitting somewhere in the world, sending out millions of emails, hoping that an unsuspected user will click on a link. And when you take a look at that, we have this security parameter around us, but if somebody clicks on a link, you now let the bad guy in. They don't have to go through those security parameters anymore. And so that's one of the biggest trends that we see right now within the city is phishing attempts. Not just our city, but there are numerous unfortunate stories out there where cities have fallen victim to computer viruses. And so today, I can say this, that we are monitoring computer viruses, computer malware in real time. We are proactively jumping into action if we do see something anomalous that is affecting the system. And that's something that we didn't have 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we were averaging 1.5 viruses a day, and our IT staff was having to go out and pull systems. Today, with the real-time system from the gateway in, we're not affected. We've had close calls, and I will say this: it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because we don't have 100% security here. But that's why we continue to build on not only our technical aspects of what the technology will bring and benefit us. Education is absolutely important here, and that's why on various occasions you will see emails come out from me saying, don't click on the link, or take a look at this, or whatever it may be.
Thank you for that. I wanted to know well, first of all, I know that the city takes credit cards for a whole bunch of things, including parking meters now. And, I mean, I can just think of, you know, a handful and more of places we take credit cards. And then there's the other part of where we deposit our money. And so the first question is, does your organization have anything to do with the security of the credit cards we take? And then furthermore, to have communication with the financial institution where the city houses its funds to make sure they are doing everything they can to make security a priority.
Mr. Chair, Councilman Neal Copper, that, again, another important question that you asked there. So it's a twofold, two-part answer. Number one, we don't deal with credit cards directly. There are pass-throughs that we have here within the city itself, meaning that we don't see that data, we don't see that credit card data. It goes through all the way to the vendor itself. So we don't manage that, or at least our IT department does not manage that security on our end. Number two, when it gets to that next level, which is the vendor itself, that's where the secure communications happen. That's where the encryption happens. That's where the database security happens. So there is a partnership to ensure, number one, that our secure pass-through is happening. That we have an encrypted communication between when that customer swipes that credit card that passes through our systems, that transaction is encrypted. We don't hold anything on the back end where we have that level of detail.
So we pretty much just trust the vendors that they're doing what they're supposed to do to put systems in places.
There is a level of trust, and that level of trust, again, is verification. What kind of encryption do they have? What kind of database support? Who accesses those databases? What is their disaster recovery like? And so with any vendor, they are also under federal law to ensure that they are abiding by specific security control mechanisms, security control processes. So there is a level of trust there, whether you sitting at home and doing a e-commerce transaction with Amazon, or we sitting here within the city itself and having a pass-through, there is a level of trust in that. However, again, it's always trust but verified. And so this goes back to your original statement of how are we monitoring this and how are we controlling this? And so that is just information security 101 of managing vulnerabilities on our end.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one more question left, and that is, can you kind of give your best guess of the end date for the enterprise planning EAP, whatever it's called? ERP. Sorry.
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair, Councilman Copper. So our very best guess right now, or at least what we are moving towards for FY20, is to have full implementation by the end of FY20. Now, again, I say that with cautiousness, because again, with an ERP, there is always an evolution. There's always updates. There's always processes that we have to look at, schedules, procedures, whatever it may be. But we've had a lot of confidence in our program manager, who's dedicated 100%, our HR rep, project manager, our finance project manager, that has been dedicated 100%. Something that we have taken ownership of. And so I can say with a lot more confidence today than I did 6 months ago, 8 months ago, that our internal processes are working, our framework is working, despite some of the challenges that we have faced, whether with personnel leaving, whether it's ad hoc type of support that we've had to take off people to look at other programs to keep the city going. I'm more confident today, but that is our goal. And that really is a nutshell without getting in more to the detail itself. We do have a schedule. I'll be more than happy to give you that schedule. Post my my interview here. That way you could take a look at what our team has done and what we're striving for.
Thank you.
Well, as former Governor Bruce King used to say, I'll take your promise, but not your commitment.
Well, and that I appreciate, and again, as an IT guy, I'm very cautious because, again, we have to plan for Murphy. We have to look at risk. We have to look at personnel. We have to assess things all the time.
Councilor,
so much.
thank you. Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Alicio. If I missed your beginning presentation where you might have talked about ERP, I apologize, but just wanted to follow up on the ERP system and the fact that we've contributed a significant amount of money. I don't even know what the number is right now. I'm assuming it's more than 10 million and more coming. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we had originally, if I recall, the number that we had forth in 2017 was 8.1 million. I'll have to double check on that one, but that's what we had actually budgeted to this point. So we're well under that at this point in time.
And then moving forward, I think you said in your your packet, it was, I can't remember the amount. Was it 3 million?
3.1, yes, that is correct.
3.1, okay. So considering that amount, a lot of that's building the infrastructure, but also contractual services. So in that package, how many full-time employees are overseeing ERP specifically?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we have right now 5 that have been budgeted for as full-time resources.
And that's just ERP, they're not pulled into other duties related to IT, or do they share
Mr. Chair,
duties?
Villarreal, that's a very good question, and to my knowledge, it is a dedicated staff.
And those are existing staff?
We, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we currently have one program manager in IT, project manager in finance, a project manager in HR. We have a forthcoming business analyst for land use, and then we also have one body which is in IT as an application support specialist.
Okay. So within your own department, there's one staff that's IT specific?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we have 2.
Okay.
So we have the program manager for ERP,
Okay.
and then we have the application specialist as well.
Application specialist, okay.
And Ms. McCoy, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but we do have that 5.
Okay. Well, it will be interesting to see. Hopefully things will stay on target and we won't have any change orders and we won't have consultants. I mean, I feel like in the end, the majority of the money has gone to consultants. And I see the value. I also see the value of our own staff making this work internally. So good luck. Thank you.
Is there a motion regarding the ITT department budget?
Move to approve.
Is there okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lucio. Okay, so that brings us to our Human Resources Department. Ms. Salazar. So in reviewing your budget, there's a 4.3 million increase, but 2 million of that is to fund the collective bargaining reserve for the police and a reserve for AFSCME due to the class and comp study. 1.5 million is in your budget to fund the city's share of increases for medical and dental insurance, which we had a presentation on, I believe, on the first day of our budget hearings. And then there's also the reclassification of a position to a safety officer. So if I look at the page 1 of the spreadsheet with all of the detail, just right at the top, the 2.05, that's the reserve I assume that we're talking about, or that I just talked about in your summary.
Mr. Chairman, yes, you're correct.
Okay, I didn't have any other page questions on page 1. Are there any questions regarding any of the line items on page 1 from HR? Okay, turning to page 2, or did you have one, Counselor Rivera? Sorry.
Ms. McCoy, did you say at one point that you were going to go through and kind of clean up some of the object codes that we had? Just this miscellaneous leave, I don't know why we have it and why it's there.
Yeah, that's kind of halfway down the page. 1, 2, 3, 9. That's the 9th line down. And there was nothing in last year's budget and nothing in this year's budget.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, this is a great example where we have multiple different object codes for different types of leave, and that is the way we are currently tracking that. We are proposing an update to our chart of accounts, simplification to our chart of accounts, not just with the funds that I discussed yesterday, but also with the account codes, the object codes as well.
Has this one ever been used for anything, or do you know what the purpose of it might have been?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, I'm going to have to get back to you on this one specifically for HR. We can do that research and get back to you.
I noticed it in multiple sheets, but just wasn't sure why it was even there.
Okay, turning to page 2, the top of page 2, the first line, operating expenses, contractual services, you got a 50% increase from $270,000 to $320,000. What's that attributed to?
Mr. Chairman, in June of 2020, our benefits portal is going to be sunsetting, so we need to go out for RFP for a new portal. It's actually a net zero because if you look on page 3, we removed it from professional contracts towards the bottom of the page.
Oh, yeah.
So it is actually a net zero.
Okay. Any other questions on page 2?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said the contract was that was expiring.
It's our, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, it's our benefits portal. where
Okay,
employees
that's what I
sign
didn't
up
hear.
for
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, turning to page 3, the third line from the bottom, there's an increase from $598,000 to $606,000. It's only $7,000. It's contractual services. Do you know what that's for?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is our administrative fees for Cigna and for our COBRA fees as well.
Okay, great. Any questions on page 3? Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Salazar. Again, to follow up on the questions for Mr. Alicio, I look at employee training tuition, $174,000. And I think you probably heard the gentleman's answer about the Centers for Excellence and how IT gets disseminated throughout the various departments. Does that occur in your budget here, that training and tuition, that outreach?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, that line item that you see on page 3 in the amount of $174,100
Right.
is dedicated for tuition assistance and also for training, citywide training initiatives, such as a supervisory training that we may have a consultant come in and do, any type of training like that. The specific department training is in the department budget specific for, in Mr. Alicio's example, IT certifications that would actually sit in his budget. I believe prior to 2016, the entire training budget for department-specific training was in HR, but it got moved to departments, I believe, in 2016, according to the records that I found.
Okay. And I just wanted to thank Ms. McCoy and staff. I did just start to flip through and saw there was a summary for training and travel. It's not, I think at some point it'd be good to just kind of see what's what, because the categories that we see here are, for instance, training and tuition. Sometimes the travel is associated with with training, sometimes, like as we know in tourism, it's just that sales function, basically. So I don't think we need to probably go too far, but basically I want to make sure I understood. So the Center for Excellence, however that evolves, however that is defined, that the people that departmentally there will be money in the budget, there is money, or that there is money in the upcoming budget for people to get that training, correct? It's not standalone.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, there is money for employees to attend those trainings. Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's probably it on that page, Chair.
Councilor Rivera.
Yeah, on that training and tuition, you know, clearly there's a safety assessment that's going to be done. Can these monies be used if departments are identified that need additional safety training?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that's an excellent question. And there's actually, if we continue with this spreadsheet, there's actually dedicated dollars specific to training. And I'm prepared to provide a listing of our training schedule for the FY20 fiscal year. But we do have those resources, and we have already begun the safety committee meetings again with specific departments, and we will ensure that employees are receiving the training that they need.
Right, and then
Sure.
we're on page 3 with the training. Okay. So, and are employees, are they still allowed to attend community college or any college with this funding?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, they are. And in addition to that, we're also working with the community college to see what classes we can bring to the city, so it's a little bit easier for employees to attend classes and obtain their degrees.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Veal-Copler, do you have items on page 3?
Thank you. I also had a question about the training and tuition, and I'm wondering, I think Councilor Harris asked most of the questions that I had, but do we have a training officer that handles these funds?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Veal-Copler, we do. We have a dedicated person who handles the funds, yes.
Okay. And so I see that we have a charge for services to other city departments. So I think we talked about that earlier. There's a operating transfers out, and where does that money go? $150K.
Mr. Chair, councilors, I don't know specifically what that $150,000 goes to, but it would be going to another business unit from this business unit. And I will get back to you and tell you what that $150,000 is for exactly. I'll have Andy come in and tell us.
Okay. And then I'm curious about professional contracts. We had $50K in the base budget, but we're not requesting anything. So what was the past use of that? Does anyone know?
Mr.
Fiscal year
Chairman,
18 was $239,000.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Veal-Copler, when we researched this, it looks like it was an additional amount for some sort of leadership training, but we weren't too sure. Based on the budget that we have for the 174, and in addition to the funding that we have for wellness training and the funding that we have for safety training, we believe that we can absorb those expenses with that funding, and that's the reason why we moved that $50,000 to fund the benefits portal.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions regarding page 3? Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Related to training and that amount, I know last year when we hired the trainer, it was very specific to overseeing not just new employee training, but also just other aspects of training that are kind of ongoing for employee development. And from what I understand, some of those are kind of falling off, and I'm not quite sure. The ones that I was interested in specifically that I thought were good aspects to add to the training schedules and to our budget was there was one customer service, The other one was implicit bias that I have been talking about for a long time to incorporate into new employee trainings, and I want to know more about that. And then I think there's an ethics piece that's required, and I'm curious to see if that's still going. And then the other aspect that not many people know about, but I think it's a great proactive way to handle mental health, is the mental health first aid. So those four, I don't know if you want to just go through the numbers first, and we can talk about that after. But these are training aspects that I think are extremely important that I want us to keep going. And my question after we finish the numbers is if you can tell me which of those trainings are going to continue, and if we have enough funding to be able to keep those going for our employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, so continuing on, page 4 as our health fund. Are there any questions regarding any of the increases on page 4? Counselor Harris.
So general liability claims paid. Kind of talk a little bit about that, what that number means historically. Are we approaching it any differently this year than what we have in the past? And it represents, a 10% increase of this line item is $1.5 million. So if we could talk a little bit about that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, this number is the information we heard from our consultants from Aon. The increases to the claims that we receive relative to our insurance benefit.
So, but these are all liability claims, general liability?
Yeah, that's how they're coded.
Ms. McCoy, do you want to add to that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, this is the line item where we pay those claims out of for our health insurance, as Director Salazar indicated earlier.
So, but it's labeled general liability. So I want to get an understanding here. And I heard both of you say that it's for health claims. Again, kind of you referenced the Aon presentation. So, are these in fact all health claims?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, to the left of your 8.5 by 11 sheets, the fund is the Santa Fe Health Fund, fund number 6107. That's how we know this is, everything coming out of this fund is for our health insurance benefits that we discussed last week with Aon, those increases.
So the general liability should ignore. Okay. All right. So, again, I can't remember exactly what the two individuals said. They certainly said our benefits were generous. I can't remember if they said that our claims were onerous or above the average. Have we looked at that? Do we know where we stand?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we have looked at that. They've given us an analysis, and I think on average, we're pretty average with a comparable city. We have had a couple of large claims over the course of this year, as they mentioned, and I think any organization can run into that situation on any given year. It happens to be us this year, and so when you have those high claims, that really drives up your total overall claims for the year.
So we have high claims. Basically, what I think I heard you start to say, this fiscal year, even though we budgeted 14.9, our claims were perhaps higher than we expected, so we're driving it 10% up.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, you're absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, all right. And, all right, I guess that's it for now on that one. I think we'll talk about that more later.
On that point,
Counselor,
so given that you're budgeting more this year based on last year, and these are claims, and you did say that you've had some high claims, so I guess you're anticipating something similar to happen. These weren't anomalies, but
Mr.
maybe a new trend or something. I mean, clearly you're expecting
Mr.
more.
Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, there, we always want to plan in the event that we do have a high claim or a couple of high claims, but the trend is that claims are increasing overall, not just with the city, but nationally.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, we heard the committee questions after the Aon consultants presented last week, and we've asked them to return to talk specifically about the excise tax, the trends in our claims, and they will be presenting in front of the Finance Committee on May 20th. So any
Okay.
questions that you would have in addition that you would want them to address, in addition to the ones that were asked last week, we've been more than happy to pass those on.
Great. I do think we need more information on this than just the broad categorization of the line items, so thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 4 with the grants and services, what is that? What is it used for?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, this is where our Cigna, it's essentially like a grant. Annually, we get the $100,000 that's in there. Unfortunately, over the course of the last 2 fiscal years, we've left a lot of money on the table that could have been spent for wellness. So our plan, is to utilize those funds to provide opportunities for employees to participate in healthy lifestyles. The other amount and the increase for that line item pertains to the New Mexico Vaccine Purchasing Act, which is required by state law, and I don't believe that it was budgeted last year, so we're budgeting it in this line item this year.
And what is that act for? What's the Vaccine Act? Is that what you called it?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, and I can get you the actual act if you'd like to review that, but it's a state requirement for organizations to contribute to.
And it's to make sure all the employees have vaccines? Is that what it's for?
It's not for employees. It's for the community, basically.
Okay, any other questions on page 4? Any questions on page 5? Questions on page 6? Okay, Councilor Hillcock.
My questions are basically the same for 2 different line items, and those are for professional services, and just to explain the use of $56,000 on the top, and then down below the $60,000. One is for benefits administration, the other one is for unemployment claims.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, the first one in the amount of $56,100 is the contract that we have with our consultant we heard from the other day, Aon, and the fees have increased, so you'll see that 6.3% increase there. The second one you talked about on unemployment, let me find it. Unemployment claims.
It's operating expenses, contractual services, professional contracts, and then across it's $60,000.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, I will have to look into that. I believe it might be for our contract, Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we use to process our unemployment claims.
Is that what it is? Yes.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk about workman's comp a little bit. So, does the city go through the same workman's comp state agency that everyone does? How do we handle workman's comp?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, this is one area where we're transitioning risk and safety staff into HR, so I have not worked in great detail on the workers' comp side yet, and Ms. Barb Baltrek is actually out on leave right now, so she's not here to answer any questions. I don't know if, Ms. McCoy, you have any information on that, but I would defer some of the detailed questions to Ms. Boltrek at this time.
That's unfortunate. I talked to Ms. McCoy the other day specifically about seeing Ms. Boltrek. I have a lot of questions about how things have been handled in the past in terms of risk management, claims, as well as safety. I'm not happy. It's that simple. And so her choice, she's out on leave. But we're going to have a separate conversation, won't we?
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Harris, we'd be more than happy to schedule something in front of the Finance Committee or other committees as well for a presentation and update from Ms. Boltrek.
Okay, very good.
Okay, any other questions on this page? We're moving 6. Yes, Councilor Rendell.
One quick question. Does our family leave go under workers' comp?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, that's separate. Sometimes, depending on the case, they can be on workers' comp and FMLA, but they're not always related.
Okay. Is there a separate line item on family leave, or does that just get absorbed through salaries and?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, there's not a separate line item, so the leave would be taken out of either sick leave or annual leave.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, questions on page 7. Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
I have a general question, in all of, I guess, from 6101 all the way down, all the way down 6101. And I sometimes contributes, I guess it's all on the next page. So is this risk management or safety? And it's in your budget, so I'm assuming it's the safety person? No, I really don't know. What is it?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, this is the safety portion of the budget, and this includes some of the safety staff that came over. So that this actually does not include the risk side, which is Barb Boltrek, but this includes the safety personnel.
Okay, and how many safety people do you have? Strictly safety officers.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, we added 5 additional, not added, we transferred 5 additional safety staff from finance to HR.
What I'm hearing, though, is they are not all going to do safety. Some are risk, is that what you're saying?
Barb Boltrek is risk, and the other 5 are safety.
Are they full-fledged safety officers?
Yes. Well, they have different titles, and I can give you the titles if you'd like.
Well, I'm kind of wondering just the focus of their job. Is it safety, real safety?
Yes, the focus of their jobs is safety. One position does assist with the risk side a little bit and the claims that come in workers' comp. So I would say her position is probably split 50-50 between risk and safety, and she will continue to support the risk side of that, but she is one of the 5 employees that I spoke of earlier.
Okay. During the other part of the discussion, I'll have more on that. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on page 7?
Just really clarification. So I heard loud and clear we've moved risk management / safety to HR. We've got risk, both in HR and finance still. And so I don't know when the right time to answer that is. But organizationally, has Ms. Boltrek been responsible for both risk management and safety within the finance department?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes, she has.
Okay. All right. So we'll talk more about that on the 20th. But also, the 5 FTEs specific to safety, and I'm thinking about the conversation we had earlier with Mr. Alicio on certification. I would like to know job description, certification, very specific information, which should run with these FTEs, quite frankly.
back in the day when we had two safety officers, full-fledged, they were certified through OSHA.
Right.
So they were very valuable.
I agree. Okay.
Yeah, if we could have all that information on the 20th, we'll have a deep dive into that discussion. Okay, Councilor Rivera.
Yeah, is this, I think when we were talking about training and tuition earlier, you mentioned something about a specific safety training budget to address those safety needs that might be identified. I wasn't able to find that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, I believe, let me find it. Give me just a second.
The only other training I found was on the last page, but that was only for 30,000.
Councilor Rivera, you're gonna find it on page 8, under Contractual Services. We're gonna have some contracts in those line items that provide for the safety training, as well as a substance abuse provider program that we have, and training on injury prevention as well.
Was that the 182 and the 50?
The 182 includes the risk and safety assessment that we'll be conducting, and that also includes the SAP program, the substance abuse program. And then down below, that for 50,000 is inclusive of the injury prevention training and hepatitis B shots and vaccines for employees.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor.
When you spoke about substance abuse, why wouldn't that go into employee wellness or the other one before?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, that's a great question, and that's one of the things that we're trying to work on to get more unified and making sure that we're being efficient with our line items and reducing them, but I would agree that we can consolidate that.
And just another point of about how things were organized in the past, the Employee Wellness Program, the EAP, was actually contractual services for substance abuse programs, and they were built into the disciplinary process in order to make a successful employee. And we didn't have all those yoga and all that kind of stuff. So that's just a point of, I think we could do a better job of what we focus on. I was going to say foo-foo, but I won't say that. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on page 8? Page 9? Okay, so that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll have some general questions for a few minutes, and then we're going to call for a motion. I'll start with Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this past year, I believe you lost some personnel to retirement within the health insurance management, I guess, of it, or some of those that would help employees with questions. Have those positions be refilled, or how are those being handled now?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, we did lose a long-term employee due to retirement, and we do have another employee who has taken up those responsibilities and is assisting employees with insurance questions.
So there's still, is it 2 or 3 employees that deal with that?
We have 2 dealing with insurance enrollments and questions.
And have we always had 2, or was it 3 before the retirement?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, I'm not sure. When I got here, Yolette was the employee who retired, and she was here for 1 day, and then she retired, so I got to work with her 1 day, which was unfortunate because she had a wealth of experience. But before that, I believe it was 2, and I think years before that they had 3 people doing insurance benefits.
So you have 2 now, and you feel that that's adequate to handle all the daily calls, questions, concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, we do pull in other staff to assist, so we're working really hard to do more cross-training within the HR division. So if someone is busy or out on leave, an employee isn't having to wait to get their answer. So we do have other people who can help answer those questions, but we essentially have 2 employees who are dedicated for that.
Yes, that one. So risk and safety used to be their own standalone department, and they've just come back into human resources. So this budget is new to your budget.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, safety staff are the ones who have come over to HR. The risk person is still under finance. They were under finance before, and according to history, I think that division has bounced back between HR and finance over the course of the last several years, and the attorney's office as well. But I don't believe they've been their own standalone department.
So the risk safety fund really should be renamed to just a safety fund under human resources?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, if that's the decision that's going to be made to split the 2, then I would say yes. If it's decided that risk will come under HR, then I would say to leave it the same, risk and safety.
Who's the risk safety administrator? Is that Ms. Boltrek?
Yes, it is.
But she's under finance, managing a budget under HR.
Well, Chair and councilors, so I think we're talking about a number of different things, and just to clarify the reasoning behind it, risk is something that is very specific. A risk exists anywhere, and we want to identify risks and then create a safe situation around them through training, through moderating behaviors, changing facilities. So that function is it is going to exist in human resources. If you look at the claims function right now, that's what exists in finance. So we're calling it a bunch of things, but really the focus of that is the claims function. And so I think there's some naming conventions that we can change over time. But right now what we're doing is trying to put similar functions around risk and safety into the human resources pot, and those that are around dollars and claims behind the risk in the finance department.
That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Lindell. Councilor Harris.
Yes. I could have been asleep at the wheel, but on page 8, compliance services. Compliance services at 182. Was that asked and answered? I know that Councilor Rivera was looking at that. Did I miss that? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, the $182,000 is made up of the risk assessment, risk and safety assessment that we'll be conducting citywide to the tune of $100,000. $65,000 is for our pre-employment screenings for safety-sensitive positions, and then $17,000 is for our substance abuse provider program.
Thank you. Sorry for the revolving. A question I would have, this gets to workman's comp, but does the city carry an experience modifier? In the construction business, for instance, you always had an experience modifier that came from the Workmen's Compensation Administration. So again, speaking to Public Works, for instance, as you look to how do you pre-qualify responsible general contractors, responsible subcontractors, we always looked, as construction managers, we always looked at an experience modifier. If it was over 1, we start to ask questions, because 1's the baseline. You know, if you're carrying an experience modifier of 0.9, hallelujah, they're good operators. So do you know, does the city carry an experience modifier?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, I'm not able to answer that question right now.
Okay, put that on the list then, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councilor Romero-Worth.
I just have a quick question on your operations goals. Develop an analytical reporting process to assist in making strategic decisions. What does that mean exactly?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, what that means is to have a regular reporting cycle of turnover rates citywide and broken down by department. This helps us make decisions, as we've talked about with class and comm, to ensure that we're staying up to date. If we're seeing a huge turnover rate in a particular area, specific to one classification, perhaps we need to evaluate and then look at the market to see if we're not being competitive. That would be one example. Basically just a regular reporting cycle so it can help us make better decisions.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Counselor Vihil Coppler.
Okay, I was asleep at the wheel as well. So on page 9 of the numbers, there's another, in safety, there's another employee training and tuition program of $30,000. Is that separate from the purpose? Is that separate, a different reason?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, that is a separate purpose, and that's additional training for citywide training relative to safety. So, for example, lockout, tagout training, aerial training, things of that nature would come out of that line item.
Okay, and then at the very bottom, I don't know, the insurance claims funds for fire and police. Does risk management, is this a risk thing where we pay those claims, or what is that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, this is something that we talked about with Brad, and I am going to defer that question to Brad.
Those are specific to fire, the last two,
And then police?
and the police. And the police one, it's always been 3,000, and it's just new, but it hadn't existed before.
But why are these in the HR budget?
Because they're paid out of the insurance claim fund.
Okay, so
It's driven by the source of fund to pay the.
this is a risk management claim, function? And that's
No,
why it's here?
it's a safety.
Oh, it's risk and safety.
Well, and that's the thing was, we need to stop saying risk and safety. It's risk or safety. And just because this is a proposed idea and the system has always had risk and safety together, and that's the way we've typed it in all the descriptions. And since we haven't actually split these two apart in the system yet, you're going to see risk and safety always together. But when we get to Tyler and Munis, we will get it to say risk, and the other one will be safety, and that will be there will be no confusion between what is risk and what is safety.
So what examples can you give of what kind of claims are paid out of here?
Mr. Chair, on that point,
Yes.
Mr. City Manager, isn't that where the money is for the OSHA mandated physicals for fire department?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, I'm guessing you're right. I can't definitively say that, but I hear Brad on my left shoulder saying yes in a whisper voice, so I think the guess is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then I'm going to the FTE charts, and I just want to confirm, so from fiscal year 19 to 19, apparently, there were 5 FTE increases. So is that the transfer over? I guess it happened mid-fiscal year, or so from 12 to 17?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, yes, you're correct. That was the transfer of the safety employees to HR.
Okay, and then since we're on that same sheet, I'll just ask you, I don't know who prepared this, but in planning and land use yesterday, they said they were asking for 3 positions, and this says 4. So I don't know if that's an error, but you might want to research that.
Any other questions specific to HR?
Okay, so I would be interested in seeing, you mentioned you had a training calendar or something. I'd just be interested in seeing that. On the goals, one thing I know we've talked about over the few months of things that have been brought to our attention, we talked about how important it was to keep the classification and compensation analysis going. And I don't see that here, and I know we just did it, but it was an old study. We did what we could to perfect it when you got here. And I think it needs more perfection, but the most critical piece is updated job descriptions. And so I would like to see that as a goal, that we have a sincere effort to update job descriptions. I think that's really the core of how you develop a credible compensation study. And the more we keep those updated, the easier it's going to be and the more accurate it will be. So that's something I would like to have happen. Then the other, I don't see anything here about management training, management and supervisory training. Would that be on your calendar?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, yes, that will definitely be on the calendar, and we've actually have done some sessions already, but yes, that will be on the calendar. And to back up about the job descriptions, part of the delivery of the consultant for the class and comp included revised job descriptions.
Well, I know that's true, but I know some of the other things we've been doing, job descriptions haven't been updated, and we have been messing with I shouldn't say messing, we've been revising minimum quals and all of that, and then we advertise positions, and then we yank them back out and to update them, and then we advertise them again. A lot of that happens. So I'm just thinking there should be a focus on accurate, updated job descriptions. So the second, under employee development training, I'm not sure what implement a new performance management program. Is that a performance evaluation system, or what is that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, yes, that's correct. A new performance evaluation form, essentially, that will be a little more user-friendly for employees to use and easier for employees to understand as well.
And so do you plan to have the employee involvement in developing that plan?
We would like to get employee feedback, and so yes, that will take place.
And will that apply to union-covered employees, or what will happen there?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vigil-Koppler, yes, it'll be citywide. Most collective bargaining, I think all of the 3 of the collective bargaining agreements actually say that the city, under management rights, can evaluate job performance. So, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Villarreal, and then I'll call for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ms. Salazar, for being with us. Back to my question about training, and we budgeted last year, like I said, to have a person hired to specifically facilitate and also conduct those trainings. And the ones that I'm particularly interested in are the customer service, the implicit bias component, to whether it fits into a cultural competency training or if it's a standalone, and then the mental health first aid. So can you speak to some of those specifically, and then any other trainings that we should know about?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I'll start with the first one, mental health first aid. That was actually a training that was conducted by the state. I believe they received a grant right when I got here. That training was delivered, and city employees were invited to attend. We actually hosted it on city grounds. And so the internal trainer is not the one who performed that. It was a certified person who provided, I believe it was a 2-day training. So definitely that was very beneficial. We got really good feedback from employees, and we will continue to work with the state to be on their distribution list in the event that they're able to provide those trainings again. with that, it was actually, they had a session where employees were certified. So we do have one employee who's certified in community services. The other has since retired. So we will continue to work with the employee who is certified to continue to offer that training throughout the fiscal year and ongoing.
Great. And they could do train the trainer, because once you're trained, you can actually train your colleagues. So hopefully you all can keep that up.
The second one is the ethics training, and there is a component of that built into the new employee orientation. And we do have another additional ethics training proposal by our training person, our training employee within HR, to provide additional ethics training on an ongoing basis for all city employees. So that is also part of our plan for fiscal year 20.
Okay.
And the third one, implicit bias training. We have worked with a consultant, and I believe Chief Padilla talked about that during his budget. He started that. I've met with that trainer, and that's definitely something that we're looking into, and we can also include that in our FY20 calendar.
And I know other practitioners that do that work in the area. So if you all need suggestions, I can give you a list of names of people that actually do that work.
Okay.
And that actually also fits into gender and transgender 101 trainings that are they're valuable, and we have expertise in our community to provide that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, that's funny that you say that, because I just spoke with an individual who provides that training, and we actually have a meeting early next week, so we will be building that into our training calendar as well.
Great. Thank you.
And I don't remember the fourth one you said.
The fourth was customer service.
Okay, and so the customer service, there's a part of that that's also embedded in the new employee orientation, but the same with the ethics. We have a separate standalone, which I think is a good thing to have and provide to city employees on an ongoing basis and as a refresher. So that is also part of our 2020 calendar.
Great. I'll look forward to the trainings. Are they also available to counselors?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We encourage you.
I actually think we should all do an implicit bias training. It's actually very interesting, and a lot of information that you don't expect comes out in those kind of trainings. So, yeah, exactly. The other question I had, not related to training, if you were to summarize the contractual services that go through your department, what are the larger contracts that we have for outside entities that work with you, other than the AE? I never get the Aon. Are there other contractual
Mr.
entities?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I would say anything dealing with the insurance benefits. Aon is one, and then of course Cigna, because they're
Right.
the company that actually processes our claims. We don't have a lot of contractual services. We have some with outside trainers, but it's pretty limited.
Okay. And then last, for the tuition funding opportunity, do you all track how much funding was utilized each year for that program?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I'm not sure how it's happened in the past. I would imagine it has been, but it definitely is now.
Do you know what it was for this last fiscal year?
I don't. I can see if we can get this.
Just curious how many employees are utilizing that opportunity. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion regarding the Human Resources Department budget? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are on to our Finance Department budget. Yes, Councilor Harris.
Now it is. Thank you, Carl. Okay, great. This yours?
don't have one either, Mr. Chair.
Oh, they were, I think they were put on the desk.
I can go check.
Which desk? Oh,
The office desk, yeah.
While ago.
you know, office suite?
Yes. Okay, so Ms. McCoy, are you gonna present your budget or your staff or?
Mr. Chairman, we stand for questions. I think it's a good format that you have. We can go through any line items and any general questions later.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's only a 1.1% increase, which is what we would expect from our finance department. We'd want you to set the example for the rest of the city. But, okay, so I don't have anything on page 1 of the spreadsheet. I don't know if anybody on the committee does. Page 2, there is a $235,000 recommended budget for budget contingency.
Mr. Chairman, that is a budget contingency line item that we are using in the current year for 2 items. One has to do with the franchise fee, the P&M franchise fee rate increase that is proposed, and you will be seeing that in the governing body. We are planning for, if there is a fee increase from 2% to 3%, that we would plan to see an additional amount in a P&M cost for the city. So that is part of that 235. And the second amount is related to the para increase that was passed at the state legislature. It's a 0.25% increase in the employer contribution into para. So by the time we had gotten to the point of budgeting and we had that bill signed, it was too late to push that through to all the different departments. So we have included it in this contingency, and we will be pushing that through to all of the departments' budgets on July 1st to accommodate for that increase.
Okay, and then above that, you got the $200,000 for the audit services. That's a result of us having an outside auditor as opposed to internal, right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there, as a result of the McCard report, there were the 10-point corrective action plan, and identified in the 10-point corrective action plan were a series of audits that we are planning to continue into future years, and that is the funding source for it.
Okay, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. With regard to that audit, there's 200,000 there, and then there's additional funding on page 6.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is for the special audits that we are doing as a result of the McCard report and the corrective action plan. The accounting division, which you are referring to on page 6, that would contain audit services for our annual audit, also known as the CAFR.
Okay, any questions regarding page 2? Councilor Vihel-Coppler.
With regard to the internal audit monies, didn't the city manager have internal audit monies too? What's the difference?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, yes, there as a result of the McCard report, we have identified several different audits, part of that being outsourcing the internal audit function, and the other being additional audits citywide that we are preparing for.
So the focus of internal auditing is to focus on, obviously, internal processes and all that. Are there going to be different auditors doing different audits? Or how's that going to be focused?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, yes, that is correct. This is, as the McCard report, it was a risk assessment, and as the findings pointed out, this organization has several areas that are at risk, and we need to improve internal controls, and we need to improve on other areas. So there, as a result of the McCard report, we will be continuing on with several different audits.
Just one more question. So will the auditors, when they're chosen, be specific skill-based auditors in one function?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, we always have to check in with the state Office of the State Auditor and select auditors off of their pre-approved list of auditors. So we would go through them similar to how we go through them for our annual audit, and the contracts have to be approved by the Office of the State Auditor. We fall under their jurisdiction, so we would coordinate with them ahead of these audits.
Okay, anything on page 3? Councilor Rivera.
Registration from 11.5 to 54,000. Can you speak to that? It's the first line.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, you'll notice a consolidation across all of our divisions into the administration division of a few different line items. Registrations are one, employee training and tuition, travel, all of this will now be budgeted centrally out of the administration division. For the most part, there's a few exceptions throughout this.
And that's to cover everyone, including Fleet, or does Fleet have their own?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, I think you pointed out that one of the exceptions, I believe there are some travel and training costs within Fleet. If I recall, the Fleet manager, Daniel Garcia, is planning for a series of trainings for his staff and travel to those trainings for compliance certification.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, on that note, we have budgeted for safety training and also compliance training through AAC certifications for the mechanics. So we are within compliance through automotive excellency at the shop.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on page 3? Anything from page 4? Page 5? And page 6, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. You already answered the audit services, so then the professional contracts, again, the first line from 705 to 120,000. So is this another consolidated line, or is this something different?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, this in part consolidation from other departments and in part an overall year-to-year increase is for audit prep services. So, for example, now that we are changing a lot of our policies around month-end and year-end, we have brought in a consultant to help us provide trainings throughout the city to coordinate the year-end processes according to best practices. This is all being led by our controller, which is a new position this year. Deborah Harris Garmendia is leading those efforts for our department, and she's working closely with the consultants for those audit prep services, as well as our staff as well.
And that's what the professional contracts are for, to bring those people in?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct, Councilor.
Okay, any other questions on page 6? Page 7? Yes, Councilor Beal. Nope. Page 8. Councilor Harris?
You know, this is probably a general question to accounting, because I remember from the budget book, did we note that we had an open position for, it didn't say chief accountant, but accounting officer? Do we have a full complement within the accounting group?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we do have a position open now that we are trying to fill that is for an accounting director. This would, yes. And also what you will see as we're going through each of the pages, each of the divisions, is an overall consolidation of different functions in the appropriate divisions. For example, accounts payable will now be sitting under the accounting division, as is traditional in finance. We're trying to protect for internal controls. We're trying to account for appropriate chain of command and to provide the training in the appropriate areas, similar training for our staff in the appropriate areas.
So is it safe to well, this is a general question. I'll wait. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, page 10. Okay, go ahead, Councilor Villacopper.
I'm sorry, I want to go back to page 7. I just have a question about under bank charges and fees. I know there's nothing for the future, but how did we get out of those? Or are they somewhere else?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Viejo-Koppler, I believe these have been transferred as is appropriate to the Treasury Department, but our treasurer can clarify for us what page that's on.
Okay. All right, she nodded yes. Thank you.
Okay, so page 10, Councilor Rivera.
Sorry, is this a new position, Ms. McCoy? Because from, I guess, personnel services benefits on down, there previously had been no actuals, and then for this recommended budget now there's funds in all those.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, these some of these positions had been previously budgeted in the Administration Division, which is the first few pages that we reviewed. In addition to that, other positions were budgeted within Treasury or Accounting. So this is consolidating all of the budget office positions into the Financial Planning and Reporting Division.
And the software subscriptions at the bottom of the page for $107,000, is that a new piece of software?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, no, those are the various software programs that I use, and that they're coming from Treasury, from the Treasury Division. My debt software, SimPro, the Bloomberg, SimPro investment software.
It's software that we've used for multiple years?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, that is correct. They were previously budgeted in a different business unit, and now we are consolidating them.
Is that why we don't see any actuals in 17 and 18, because they were in a different area?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, they were in the Treasury Division, where I was located. I was in the Treasury Business Unit prior to being moved to the Financial Planning and Reporting Business Unit. And I brought my software, my salary, and all my other expenses with me.
Right, so I don't know if those have gone up or down, or since the actuals aren't available, but
They're flat. The Bloomberg went up, I think, $3,000.
okay. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Okay, page 11. 12. 13. 14. Page 15.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
On page 15, repair and maintenance of equipment from $306,000 last year to $200,000 this year.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that's a great question. So under repairs and maintenance of machinery, equipment, vehicles, which is the next section down, and I believe if we go over to auto parts on page 16 and tires on page 17, these accounts Brad worked on with our fleet manager, Daniel Garcia, to right-size the budget for these. In some instances, they're increasing. In some instances, they're decreasing based on actuals. I think the general takeaway from this is our fleet is an aging fleet that does require more maintenance, even though we had over-budgeted maybe in one case. For example, the line item you pointed out on page 15 was previously budgeted at over $300,000, and we're bringing that down to $200,000, which we are confident is the appropriate budgeted level. But overall, the takeaway is for tires, repairs, and maintenance. Since we do have an aging fleet, we are trying to we are seeing more repairs and maintenance citywide for this fleet. In addition, some of the increases are also due to DOT compliance for the number of miles that we travel before we have to do maintenance or tire change, that sort of regular maintenance.
And Mr. Garcia, you deal with our fleet all the time. These funds are sufficient, you think, and in the appropriate places?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, I do. The reason being that we are, as of now, for the past 6 months since I've been in the position, doing 85% of our repairs in-home. and we are not subbing out as much of the repairs. So we've seen more of what is actually needing to be done on our fleet. And being aging and departments buying newer vehicles out, I think we're okay with that amount of money.
Very good. Thank you.
Councilor Bill-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Garcia, how many cars or vehicles or whatever, what is it, do you take care of like everything except police and fire? Or what are we talking about?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Councilwoman Coppler, we repair the police department vehicles. We do not repair fire department. They have their own shop. As far as solid waste, they have a shop which they take care of their larger trash trucks and also transit. They take care of stuff. On the backside of that, we provide the parts support for waste management and for transit out of us there at Fleet. Our department handles its own parts.
So any other motor pool type cars?
Anything else, Parks and Rec, motor pool, streets, anything else is repaired there at the shop.
Quite a large contingent.
It entitles about 1,200 units.
That's gracious. And how many people are in your division?
Right now there is 10 of us, including myself.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Garcia, do you still have your own auto parts warehouse, or are you going out to, or having someone deliver parts?
As far as the auto parts warehouse, Councilor Rivera goes, we have 3 in-house parts gentlemen that buy parts locally here in the city to keep the monies here. There's about 20% of that are not available here locally due to their specific vehicles. So we had to get them out of Albuquerque. Sometimes, depending on the pressing issue, to try and get the vehicles out to do the maintenance on the streets, like during snow removal, I will instill somebody to get in the vehicle and go pick up the parts. So we have a timely manner and turn around on our repairs.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Romero Worth.
I guess this question is for Ms. McCoy. We have an aging fleet. How many years left do we have on it? And, what are we doing to start thinking about what needs to be replaced or how we do that? I mean, do we do it all at once? Do we do it every year? We rotate some out, we put some new. How do we think about that?
Every year we do, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, every year we do rotate the vehicle replacement. What we are noticing is that the funding for that, since the Great Recession, has greatly been reduced for vehicle replacement citywide. So we're trying to get back to a regular replacement schedule, similar to what Mr. Alicio spoke about with IT replacement. In addition to the work that Mr. Garcia has done since he started in October by starting to get to more fully staffed division for the fleet division, bringing in-house, as he mentioned, the majority of the repairs and maintenance for our fleet. He is also working with legal and purchasing at this time to contract out for a system called AssetWorks, which would enable us to start to track the age, the mileage, all the key indicators, so we know the cost of the repairs and maintenance per unit, so we are able to understand when it is the most beneficial, when a vehicle is costing us more to repair than to just flat out replace it. So we're looking forward to using the new system to provide some of the data analytics to support that vehicle replacement in a more strategic way.
And just as an aesthetic thing, are we going to streamline the logos that go on the side of those cars? I mean, I have to say, just anecdotally, they do look old, and they're also really inconsistently labeled. I don't know. It just seems like it is sort of a reflection on the city as a whole, what we put out there. So just curious what we think about that.
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Worth, on that note, I have, as the vehicles come in, started to replace the door stickers that say City of Santa Fe on them. And the asset numbers, which we currently track as 5-digit number, as they wore out, I'm starting to replace them as they come in one at a time. That is standard procedure at the shop. As we do our maintenance, to clean it up, make it look more presentable with the Fte Charts.
Okay, Councilor Harris.
Yeah, Mr. Garcia, thanks for being here. This is as much information I've heard on our fleet, quite frankly, since I've been here. So I'm really pleased. And I have a quick question. This has to do with your facility, your shop. What kind of condition is it in?
Well, the roof leaks.
Okay.
It is currently a 6,100 square foot facility consisting of 4 bays. We do need to do some updates to it to house some of our bigger equipment and to get more equipment in to do more of the major repairs in-house.
You answered my question. Thank you, sir.
Okay, any more questions on fleet? Can we turn to page 20? To the payroll. Any questions on page 20? Page 21. Page 22. Okay, Rivera.
Sorry, on page 21 at the bottom, for professional contracts from 6,000 to 85,000. So just wondering what that was for.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that in conjunction, I actually want to point out one thing on that same page above in salaries and benefits. There was a position that was approved last year but was not funded, and it's in at all. Right now, we have 3 funded positions in purchasing. That is the same number of positions that we had in purchasing about 20 years ago. Even though we have an increased budget, increased volume and workload that's flowed through this organization over that 20-year period. In addition, we have taken on reviewing contracts, for example, for other organizations as their fiscal agent and purchase requisitions and purchase orders, for example, BDD. So all of that, and with the same number of personnel. So we thought it was prudent. This is one of the main drivers of our increase in the division, or in the department overall, and in this division. So it's to fund a 4th position that we will be bringing in and requiring a CPO and requiring to be have the appropriate training. The contractual services increase that you referenced, it is in part to prepare for the transition as our current CPO is retiring. We are very fortunate to have Shirley Rodriguez, who has been here for a few decades and taken this organization through a really rough time in the past few years. She was the only person handling that workload and the volume that I mentioned earlier for over a year. And so we are planning for her upcoming retirement. So congratulations to Shirley. But we will need to bring someone in for either on contract while she through that transition period, or potentially bar that money up into salaries if we are able to find someone to double fill that position.
And have the other 2 positions been filled in, so it's fully staffed?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, we now have fully staffed, or the 3 positions are filled. And next year, the budget will enable us to fill the 4th.
Congratulations, Shirley.
Page 22. Page 23. Page 24. 25.
There.
Harris.
Yeah, so this is risk management. We've talked a fair amount and have a lot more to go. But legal contract. We have a legal contract under risk management. What's that used for? I mean, it was $70,000 for this year. It's another 70.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, as you can tell from the prior year actuals, this is always budgeted at this level for the use of the city attorney's office for any of our claims work that they may have to do or contract out for. But as you can tell from prior fiscal years, the full amount is not regularly utilized.
Well, we just have one prior year, 17. It is much lower, I grant you that. But this was, I think, the only line item in all the departments, other than obviously city attorneys, that we had a line item for legal services.
On that point, though, we do have one on page 26, legal contract for insurance claims, the same thing. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, we can get you a breakdown of working with the city attorney's office on what those two line items would be used for, because that does total over $100,000.
Right, and excuse me, I should say, I'm just wondering, is this the best place for them? I mean, if it goes, if it gets handled really through the city attorney's office, is this the best place for these two line items?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, that's a great question. As Brad explained with the HR budget earlier, the funding source drives the allocation and where it's located in the business units and then in the corresponding departments. So because the first item, which is the $70,000, is for the Risk and Safety Administration Fund, and then the second item on page 26 is out of the Insurance Claims Fund. That's why it's located here, but this would be at the full discretion of the city attorney's office to utilize in support of their work.
On that point, Councilor Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the payroll reporting system when you enter your hours and such, so if this is in a whole different department and a city attorney works on these kinds of claims, how do they charge against it, or are these all contracted out?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Viejo Coppler, I believe these both are in the contracts, professional contracts for the item on page 25, and legal contract, contractual services for the item on page 26. So they would be contractual services.
So we might end up contracting with a law firm to process claims?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Viejo Coppler, again, I will work on the itemization with the city attorney's office for the potential use of these to provide more explanation, again, since both of these contracts together total over $100,000. But yes, that would be a potential use of this funding.
Okay, anything else on page 26? Page 27? Or page 28? Okay, we're on to our treasurer. Anything with questions on page 29? Page 30. Councilor Rivera.
Yeah, the Office of the Treasurer, I think object code 510310, service contracts I assume that's just a one-time contract for last year that this year we don't need.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, this is for a contract that was proposed by the previous administration to outsource the payroll function. We have determined that that is not necessary. And so, yes, that was essentially a one-time cost for this year that has been removed for next year, so essentially a savings. Similarly,
That just reverted back to the general fund then?
it will. Yes, that is correct.
And I interrupted you, so you were about to finish saying something?
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Rivera, on that, there are several points where you're seeing decreases which resulted in savings. As we have looked through this budget, things for training items, there was a $15,000 appropriation last year for executive coaching, which has been removed. We have included other training line items for training for our staff, but we went through our budget pretty diligently to make sure it was in line with this administration's goals.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Councilor Harris, go ahead.
Yeah, this was going to be a somewhat of a general question, but I think it's appropriate to ask it here. So salaries are going down about 14%. And it seems like, even though it's not to the extent as, say, planning and land use, but there's an element of reorganization within the finance department, it seems to me. Is that a fair statement?
Mr.
With that,
Chairman.
and that's in part driving this reduction here for salaries?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes, that is correct. There are several employees that are moving out of the Treasury. For example, accounts payable is currently managed under Treasury and is now moving into the accounting division, which is more traditionally aligned. If you look at our current organization structure, it's mainly two silos, and then fleet and purchasing. Within those two silos are accounting in one, and traditional accounting and budget, and the other one is a combination for treasury and accounts payable and payroll. So the proposal that you're seeing in front of you now is to flatten out that organization. So accounts payable will now be housed in conjunction with accounting. Payroll will be separate to protect for internal controls. Budget will be separate under financial planning and reporting. Fleet and purchasing will also maintain their independence. So it's a much flatter organization.
And so I heard you earlier, and you repeated the point about accounts payable moving into accounting, which is the traditional arrangement. Is accounts receivable typically under a treasurer's function?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, yes, that is correct.
Thanks, Chair.
Councilor Romero-Worth.
So just one other question on this page 30. The software subscriptions are going away. What's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the bottom? We were spending $27,000 this year, recommended nothing.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, this is in part, goes hand in hand with the increase in financial planning and reporting. This, I believe, specifically was for the Bloomberg system that our investments officer, Brad, uses for investment purposes.
It just went somewhere else. It moved departments.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, yes,
With
that
Brad.
is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then finally, page 31. Okay, so general questions. Councilor Harris.
Thank you. Well, first of all, part of that reorganization, I hadn't mentioned this before, but the fact we've got purchasing here in finance, we've got risk management here is tremendous. I mean, the fact, we're too scattered anyways, but to be scattered like that departmentally was kind of foolish. So, and certainly Ms. Rodriguez, I know, has done a tremendous job covering for a very tough situation. But I also see, in your goals, and this is a general goal, it has to do with continuing identification and reduction of bottlenecks in processes. And the purchasing has been a bottleneck, not because of you, Ms. Rodriguez. I hope you believe me on that. It's sincere. But anyways, what are we doing besides really getting this appropriate staffing at 4 FTEs for the upcoming year to really improve any other procedural bottlenecks that occur within purchasing?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, thank you for that question. We are, since the fall, late summer, early fall, Shirley and her team, in conjunction with the City Attorney's Office, has been working on revising the purchasing manual. It has been a very long process, but a very diligent process between the two departments and other departments. We have a draft that we submitted to all departments, and each department had an opportunity to resubmit their comments back to the City Attorney's Office and to Shirley and her team. And they've gone through each and every comment for hours and hours. It's probably over 10 or 15 hours that they put alone into reviewing the comments on the procurement manual. Part of that is to clarify and to streamline what the process is and to bring us in alignment with the state procurement code. In addition to that process that our teams have been working through this year, we have contracted with Colorado Independent Consultants Network for a independent, this is part of the outsourcing of the internal audit function, and this will be an independent study to bring forward recommendations on how we can streamline our purchasing process. So I have the most recent report that we received, the most recent update that we received from the consultant this morning, and one of the items that he highlights for us in this report is the threshold of approval level. Right now, Shirley and her team approve all recs and purchase orders that are created in the city. So something for $150 or something for $150,000. So one of his recommendations is to set a threshold where departments are able to approve their own requisitions and purchase orders up to a certain amount. They will still have to follow procurement law. They will still have to follow our procurement policies and procedures, yet they would, the onus would be on them to follow that, and they would be subject to our annual audit, where we would pull a sample set for testing to ensure that they are in compliance with our laws and with our city policies. In addition to that, while we're on the threshold section of his recommendations, another recommendation is the thresholds that council approves at. Other organizations in the state of New Mexico and in other similar size organizations have a much larger threshold for council approval. So those would, start out maybe at $75,000 in some organizations. I think the highest in our neighboring organizations is $250,000, which is the Santa Fe County. So that would be one of his recommendations as well, to streamline that process. And in addition to streamlining it, he actually goes into recommendations of how we can save money by utilizing bid websites, where we would be able to post our RFPs or our bids on websites, as opposed to publishing the announcements in our local newspapers or in our local publications. We would reach a much broader audience if we actually posted on industry-specific websites.
That would lead to my second question, but I want to follow up on the first one. And so we've been aware for a while of the state procurement code and some other things. So, and you explained the draft and the process to get it up to. When would we have an adopted procurement manual? It will take time, obviously, particularly if we change thresholds and put more down at a departmental level. So that'll take time. But would it be possible to have the procurement manual in place by the start of the next fiscal year?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we do have to bring that in front of the Finance Committee and the governing body for approval, but I think that is a goal that we can set. And if not, at the very beginning of the fiscal year, sometime soon after that.
Okay, well, that'd be great. I think it's important to, certainly this is a critical function, and to be able to start off the new year with, again, there's been some things to work out, but I think that'll be outstanding. It's actually, my next question had to do with not necessarily bids. I happen to be an advocate for third-party procurement. I think it saves a lot of time and money in many situations. But have you or your staff, Ms. Rodriguez, probably has not had time, but do we have a sense of how often do we use third-party procurement? Do we get a little bit, I don't want to say lazy, but it's a much easier process than going through formal bids. So is there any change in views similar to what you described in terms of industry-specific bid sites, procurement sites? Yes. Hello, Ms. Rodriguez.
Hello. Mr. Chairman, Councilor.
I don't think your mic's on.
At this time, we're not using any third party.
Well,
Or are you I'm sorry, can you?
I'm thinking like CES
Oh,
or
okay, I apologize.
Houston Galveston or.
I would say at this time, the city departments are probably procuring with about 75% cooperative agreements.
Through
and
cooperative
state price-
agreements,
And
through-
state price agreements.
Okay, yeah, and state price agreement, 75%. Okay. Do you have a view on that? Is that, you think that's high, or you think that's advantageous?
I think that's high. I think that we should be processing more solicitations for service and procuring goods.
Okay, all right. Well, certainly with staff, part of it's been necessary because of the short staff within purchasing. So with the staff and a new procurement manual, as it's been adopted and accepted within the departments, we might be able to get down to, say, a 50% mark or something like that.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think at this point, the departments are looking to expedite their procurement, and that's the easy way to do it. They just
Right.
feel that it's a longer process because we're short-staffed.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't come up with another word besides the L word. That's really not what I meant to say, but it is much easier and it keeps things moving oftentimes. So I appreciate your answer and your work. Thank you. I also noticed that there's a reference that you're going to really look at the lodger's tax ordinance. This is in one of your goals. Okay. Lodger's tax ordinance, and I think you identify land use and maybe this city attorney's office or land use and somebody. What's the timing on that one? That's something I spoke to the other day, and I'm very much interested in.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we don't have a set timeline at this point. We have started meeting with our city attorney's office, the members of the land use department, and our treasurer, Christina Keys, is leading that effort from our office. So she can provide a little bit more detail about the substance that we've been discussing.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilor Harris. In regards to the rewriting of the ordinance, discussions are underway between land use, finance, the city attorney's office, economic development,
Tourism?
tourism. Yes, they were
They
there
have a vested
as well.
interest in that one.
It was a collection of people in a very crowded room. All very interested in how we can rewrite this ordinance to best serve the city as well as the constituents. We're in the initial stages, so as we progress, I'm sure we'll be able to provide you with an update.
Great. Well, I was very pleased to read it. I think it's essential that we do it, and so hopefully it can move forward at a reasonable pace. Thank you. Those are my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Romero Worth.
Well, Councilor Harris asked my question, and I guess I sort of wanted a little bit more detail, but maybe I'll just let it go on what kinds of things we're looking at, and then I'll just wait to hear when you're ready to talk about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Lindell.
Just one quick question. How are we doing on our reserves?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, specifically about the general fund reserves, is that your question? In the FY18, we met the DFA mandated 8% reserves. The Santa Fe City Council has a bit of a higher standard. They have a reserve level of 10%, and we did not meet that 10% in fiscal year 18, as is outlined in the current year FY19 budget. It was not budgeted to meet the 10% reserve, but we are budgeted to meet the 8% DFA mandated reserve. In the FY20 budget, we are budgeting sufficient reserves to meet both the 8% and the 10% reserve for the first time in that 3-year fiscal 3 fiscal year period.
That's good news. Thank you very much.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. Clearly not something, I think, for this year, but do most cities have their fleet management division or their fleet services out of the finance department?
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Rivera, different organizations have a different internal service approach. Some organizations completely split it off into its own department in terms of like a general services department that handles facilities repairs and maintenance as well as vehicle repairs and maintenance. Other cities do have it under the finance department, or so it varies depending on the organization. I think as far as the city of Santa Fe's history, it's also moved around just like risk and safety has.
And does it make sense to really be in the finance department, or if you could do it any way you wanted, where would it be?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Rivera, I really do appreciate working with the fleet division and their approach, I think, because they are capital assets that we have in the city, and we maintain their inventory. And there are significant ties between the purchasing office and their auto parts office that it currently works in the organization the way we have it.
Okay. Thank you. That was all, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks to all your staff for a very, very intense time period for the budget. When we look at all these papers and all the number crunching, we're picking apart tedious pieces, but you all know the overall goal and vision, so it's helpful. And I wish we knew all the pieces to it, and I think that's why we ask these questions that may seem redundant, so thanks for bearing with us. I was wondering if I could ask Ms. Rodriguez a question about her department that we appreciate greatly, and I know you've been short-staffed, and a couple years ago and even last year during the budget hearings, we had talked about right-sizing purchasing, and from what I always hear, we never have enough of staff to be able to make that department whole or the division whole. So I guess I just wanted to hear from you about this change. And so the 4th position would be on contract, but they'll not on contract. The 4th position's full-time.
Yes.
Okay. So what's the contractual?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we are planning for Ms. Rodriguez's retirement. Right. So the event that to bring someone in on contract to fill in for Ms. Rodriguez while we advertise and recruit would be, in my opinion, the worst case scenario. The best case scenario would be that we could double fill the position. We plan to advertise within the next month and keep it an open-ended advertisement for the Chief Procurement Officer. So best case scenario, we could bring in someone and double fill the position to have.
When you mean double fill, they're going to explain that, because I don't think
that
is
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal. That's in this particular instance, what I mean by double fill is to have someone sit alongside Shirley to take over her knowledge and her expertise, to have that transfer of knowledge through a 2 or 3 month period before she retires. In that case, we would then take a portion of what we have budgeted in contractual services and do a budget adjustment request to move it into personnel services.
So, Ms. Rodriguez, what would be your ideal number of staff people if we didn't have to worry about money?
I think 4, a total of 4. Can I give you a little bit of history?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so when I started back in 1994, there was 3 staff in purchasing. Since then, we have additional organizations. We've taken on Water, BDD, SWAMA, GCC, MRC, Southside Library, and 2 new fire departments without any staff. We're still with 3 staff when I first started.
And so that period of time from 94 to now, when was probably the time period we really needed to up staff?
I'm going to say probably about 15 years ago.
And so you think 4 is sufficient?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, if I can interject a bit before Shirley continues that question. I think with some of the proposed changes that we're going to be bringing forward to the council as a result of the independent audit of procurement in the city will help to alleviate some of that workload. Like I talked about earlier with the thresholds, we should not have every single dollar amount go through Shirley's office. So I think a combination of that, but I defer to Ms. Rodriguez for her candid.
So beyond the efficiency piece, there's probably a technological piece that may be easier for you all that I would like to hear from you because you know it day to day. Is there something that we should think about as we move forward that would be helpful for staff to get, other than the number, the thresholds? That makes sense if it makes sense to you all, but what else do you think could be possible?
So right now we have 2 staff that are CPO certified, and in order to approve all procurement, they have to be CPO certified. So I recommend that the 3rd staff that comes in, that's a requirement that they have to be CPO certified.
Anything else? Any technology it needs?
Well, we haven't had time for training. I think we need to attend more training for mandates on procurement.
And then is that put into the budget for trainings for their staff as well?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, yes, we plan to engage with a company to come in and do procurement track training specifically for the city of Santa Fe. And it will be open to our staff in the finance department. In addition to our staff, it will also be open to the individuals that deal with procurement in our city departments. For example, public works, project managers, or fiscal administrator staff as well. In addition to that training, we also plan to have a finance track to review accounting, like Accounting 101, 102, again, for our staff, as well as department staff and the fiscal administrators in the departments.
Anything else you want to share, Ms. Rodriguez?
So some of the training that I recommend would be public speaking and software programs and management trainings.
And I know right now there's a backlog due to short staff. Is there something you all have thought about in the short term to be able to deal with some of the contracts and the invoices and all the processing you have to do that's stacking up as we speak right now? So I'm just curious if there is something that you all as a team thought about to be able to tackle that in the short term.
So I'm working a lot of overtime to keep the workload, keep up with it in a timely manner. I mean, that's our goal.
Is there something else we could do to help you with that? Because the short term, I'm just thinking there's this.
Okay, well, we need to.
I know, but we need to know how we're going to deal with this because every single department is affected by this. And I just feel like it's part of our budget, but in order to fulfill our budget, we have to get all our contracts through. And I'm trying to figure out, I guess maybe you can let us know what is a goal to help Shirley in her department to get all those contracts and everything that's backing up because of the short staff issue.
So, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, I think just in summary, to state what we have reviewed today, I think the independent procurement audit is going to be bringing forward some recommendations for streamlining procurement functions within the city. In addition to that, we are rolling out a new procurement manual and proposing to hire a 4th staff member that does have a CPO certification. In addition to that, the staff in the purchasing office does provide one-on-one training for staff. When we do see repeated errors coming in, they will go out of their way to provide, one-on-one direct training for staff to shorten that turnaround time for the city departments. I think there will be a significant amount of training as well as we roll out the procurement manual on the processes and procedures after the governing body approves those to make sure that we shorten up that room for error.
I'm just thinking like next week.
Mr. Chairman.
This is all long term. It's going to take a while to hire, et cetera. But
Counselor, can I say something?
Sure.
So as far as the contracts, that is a priority in my office. The turnaround time for that is like a couple of days.
Okay.
The requisitions, that can take up to a week or two. But as far as contracts, I get those out immediately.
I'm just trying to find some support for your team. So hopefully we can figure that out in the short term. Can we also get a new organizational chart for finance and understand the changes so we know who's who and also how it's structured now that it's flattened out? I'd like to see that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, there is a copy of the org chart for each department in the budget book, but we would be happy to give you more specifics.
More specifics is what I'd like. Thank you.
Anything else, Councilor Villarreal? Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The organization charts of which you speak, are those current and proposed, or what are they? I'm sorry, I didn't see them.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, yes, those are the proposed. They are included in the FY20 proposed budget book, so they are in alignment with the FY20 proposed budget.
Thank you. So I wanted to, first of all, commend you because in your goals and your overall narrative, you focus a lot on customer service. And I know that that is something that when I was running for office, that's all we heard was how bad the city's customer service was. So I'm very, very pleased to see that, and I hope that it, all works out. Which I would have to say, anybody that I've dealt with in finance has always been very cordial, but that's because they don't want me to get upset. On the May 1st memo that you gave us with all this stuff, I wanted to ask, is it going to be you that follows up on all of the remaining things that have to be done, or how will that work?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, we have a list of all of the follow-up items that are still outstanding, and this May 1st list is absent the list of requests from yesterday's hearing and today's hearing. So I've split these into different departments that are responsible for responding. Our office is coordinating the response to make sure you receive these packets and that it's your questions are answered properly. So you can expect that to come directly through the finance department, but each of the departments listed are the ones that are responsible for providing the response.
Okay, yeah, because there's very good follow-up on some of the questions that have already been done, and I just want to make sure that all of the pending things listed, because Monday will be the last, I guess, the last of what we're doing here, hopefully, and so after that's over, I'm just wondering how will we get the results of the questions without having to go to each department individually. And like you said, it's going to come through you. You'll be the clearinghouse and so on. Okay. And then more specifically on one of the questions, and I don't believe the HR is here, but the response in there, it's an April 30th memo regarding the reserve policy for the benefits fund balance. And I'm wondering what your opinion is on that, because it does say that on April 8th, 2015, although some time ago, there was council discussion on establishing a $5 million reserve. What's your opinion on that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, I believe that is the lowest that we should go for a self-funded system. I know Director Salazar is doing some research into what is the threshold, the recommended threshold for those reserves. As we were talking about earlier in response to Councilor Lindell's question, it's DFA requires an 8% reserve for the general fund. The City Council has required a 10% reserve. And I think we can bring our recommendation to the governing body on what that reserve level needs to be, but I would prefer to do some research and to understand what self-insured entities should carry a reserve at. Is it 50%? Is it 35%? What would be acceptable? But I think 5 million is at the minimum of what we should be carrying.
So that'll go through committee process generated by you, and then a decision will be made.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, yes, that is correct.
All right, and then I pointed out earlier, but I want to make sure because I'm very focused on, as you are, I know, and on getting FTEs down to the minute. That's where our majority of costs are. So I just want to point out again that there's a mistake on in the planning and land use department on this sheet. Based on what I heard here, they were requesting three new FTEs, and here it says 4. So I just want to make sure, because that's where a lot of unknowns happen after that. So that would be part of your follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Coppler, yes, we have noted that to provide the explanation for the 4 FTE increase.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion regarding the finance department budget? Okay, motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, so now we're going to hear about the capital budget. Ms. McCoy.
Chair,
Yes. And actually, I'm glad you said that because Councilor Villarreal actually raised that concern yesterday, and I think maybe we do need to have a discussion briefly about what is the intent. I certainly don't want to overstep my boundary as a finance chair. This is probably something that should be vetted through Public Works and Land Use Committee. But that's a good question. What's the intention with us hearing this today?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, the intent of bringing forward a capital budget is to identify all of the projects that already have a funding source identified. Director Wheeler is doing a check-in with each of the departments to identify needs for future funding allocation, and the funding sources for the future projects will be determined in conjunction with the finance department. So, for example, if we decide to go out for a GEO bond or another GRT bond in about a year and a half, that would be funding that is not yet allocated. The projects before you, we have narrowed down to funding that has already been allocated. So, for example, the over $12 million in capital outlay funds that the state legislature appropriated this year. Those funding sources we would like to have appropriated by the governing body as soon as possible so we can start the work that is done as soon as those funds are available from the state.
So I as chair of the finance committee, I don't want to get into a discussion that's about projects. I think that's more appropriate for the Public Works Committee. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about funding sources, the amount available, or the amount already came in, I'd like to limit the discussion to that if by all possible. Because, like I said, I don't want to be recommending projects. I think that should come from our Public Works Committee.
one last. So, and is it fair to say then that as far as Ms. Wheeler and the others who've worked on this is kind of the limits, the outside limit of the available funding for FY20? Or do we anticipate other funding becoming available?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we definitely anticipate other funding becoming available, and as that funding becomes available, we will be bringing that forward to the Finance Committee, the Public Works Committee, and the governing body at the appropriate time. I believe there was a specific example for a transit project that Brad and I discussed within the last few days where the funding was not yet available, I believe, to the tune of about $200,000. So that was not included in the list in front of you, but when that $200,000 is available and awarded, I believe, from the federal government, is that correct? We will be bringing that in front of the governing body for approval.
And on that point, we heard the other night at the MPO meeting that the state had appropriated, I think, $50 million through House Bill 694. That there will be some portion of that money that will be eligible for roads. But the catch, I think, according to the letter from the state, is that the roads have to be picked from the list that's on the help me on the so there's they have to be on the MPO list, but which one I forget.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Worth, the way I understood it was they would like them to be on the MPO's Master Transportation Plan, but they did not necessarily have to be.
Okay.
There are ones that wouldn't have to be, like our maintenance projects that aren't typically on a planning document like that.
And do you know how much money we might be able to get through that process?
So that $50 million, the way I understand it, is going to be distributed between the 6 districts somewhat equally. I think a couple of districts are going to get a little bit more than our district, or then we're going to be one of the 4 districts that gets a little bit less. I think our district.
And we're District 5, correct?
It was $6 million that District 5 is going to get, and so that's between the counties and municipalities within them. It's San Juan County, Uribe, Torrance, Taos, and Santa Fe County.
Yeah. So, and this has just the award, the letter about how you apply for that just came out, I think, last week. So, or maybe the beginning of this week. They all blur together. But just as another example of funding that's is not reflected here, that's going to be important for us.
Mr. Fletcher.
Mr. Chair, councilors, mayor. So the object of this was to take and identify all funded and approved, or and the ones that aren't approved. This was originally started out as the council just adopted at the last council meeting a change to the budgeting process to roll capital forward from this fiscal year to the next fiscal year. At one time, it was sort of a finance chair, acknowledged, this year, but we wanted to actually get it into policy. So this here document originally started as just those that are to be rolled over. The money's already been secured. The projects have been mostly approved. Like in the GO bond, or excuse me, in the GRT bond, while individual specific projects haven't gone through the council and the contracting process, but in the approval of the ordinance of the GRT bond, you approve these projects. And so this was supposed to be no new money, but because of the state and their appropriations, the fact that the governor had signed it, those projects were added to this list. Thanks to the help of Director Wheeler, Director Munoz, Community Services Director, we and everybody kind of worked on this here this last couple weeks, getting it all cleaned up. Our grant writer, David Chapman, knew a bunch of other state projects that were funded in this past legislature that weren't in the original list. So that's really what this is to do, is to show projects that have been approved and funded is the primary purpose. And then the idea was to give you an idea of what are the various funding sources we have for these capital projects.
Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Would you clarify which projects are in this document?
So in this document here, this is just a companion. We plan on adding more detail. We want the individual projects you may recognize from the GRT bond ordinance that we brought through, specifying each and every individual project, a little write-up about it, where it is, what council district, the scope of the project, the justification for the project, and the consequences of not doing that project. We plan on developing a similar document that will give you the same level of detailed information on each and every project here. And then also, as Director Wheeler and I were discussing, there's a new protocol being developed that quarterly we report the progress on these projects. And so we're going to work together and develop a reporting mechanism to keep the council informed, that they'll be on a quarterly basis get an update on where are we at on the capital, what have we accomplished, and various other data that you would be interested in. Right now it's just preliminary. It's just
Okay. So this is the, all of these projects are from the 2018 GRT bond.
that is in this document, yes.
Got it. Do we have, of those projects as compared to this very, very, very sizable list of projects, will we receive and will we see when we expect to break ground or start on, I mean, what's the scheduling for projects?
We plan to provide a quarterly report that would give you an idea of start date, size of the project, what's to be done, and expected completion date.
When should we expect the first report?
July?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councilor Rivera.
Bringing this up, it really has nothing to do with money, but it really just the way that it's worded. I think I want to know if it's a safety consideration or not, but under Parks and Rec, there's, and this is on page 10 of the capital outlay book receipt, but it says extremely dangerous conditions exist at this time. Is something being done about that now, Regina, or is that just, oh, I'm sorry, that's Parks and Rec, that's not you.
Yes, Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yes, the bridge project is underway. We're assessing the bridges and engineering the resurfacing of a number of bridges that are dangerous.
So if there are extremely dangerous conditions that exist at this time,
I'm not personally familiar with them. I don't know.
Chair, City Councilors, Councilor Rivera. Yeah, some of the bridges that do pose a danger are blocked off.
they are blocked up?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
That's all I wanted to make sure, because again, if it's a safety thing, just wanted to make sure that that was being addressed.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification, 3102.
13102 is the 0.5% GRT capital fund.
0.5% GRT.
And that fund, I believe, gets 19.5% of total GRT.
Say that again.
I believe that Fund 3102 receives 19.5% of total GRT revenues by the city.
So I was looking at which fell into that, which categories. So at first I thought it was all ERP, but it's not. So it's ERP, financial software, and then Southside Teen Center. And
There is actually a very specific pecking order of what that Fund 3102 can fund.
What,
And
can you give this?
Yeah,
Can you give us that?
It's in the municipal code.
Okay.
I believe it's Chapter 18, but I'll have to verify that.
Do you know generally what its mandate
I know
is?
that IT and computer software is in that. It is our capital fund, but it's not what you would purely think of as construction of buildings. It's more of capital outlay. I think we fund vehicle purchases out of it. But I will get you
Okay.
the Chapter 18.
Thanks. Andy's coming down. Andy knows.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, actually the greatest share of expense in that is to pay the city's GRT debt service on GRT bonds. So that, you know, there are items like the ERP project, of course, the Southside Teen Center, but the lion's share, if you will, of the costs coming out of that fund are for GRT bond debt service.
Great.
There are also a few personnel and operations costs in there associated with running the city's CIP program. Those positions are located in engineering and in facilities, but that's really minor compared to the you know, everything else is pretty minor compared to the debt service. That's really where the bulk of that money in that fund goes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Councilor Harris.
On 3102, so these are projects that revenue stream that's available through 3102. So, for instance, I'm looking at you know, ERP and network upgrades. So, are we looking at money that's expected in FY20 that will go to that, or is this because I also heard you say these were funded line items? So, what I guess I'm trying to ask is, there's going to be additional money within 3102 that may be available for other capital projects.
Chairman, Councilor Harris, Fund 3102 typically carries a fund balance with it. We don't spend it to zero every year. Right now, we began the year with approximately $5 million, and we are budgeting. The original budget was for $17 million of GRT revenue. We really expect it to come in. In FY18, it came in at $21 million. So the FY19 budget, our current year, is very low budget at $17 million. So we're really expecting it to come in closer to that 21. And I believe that we're going to budget somewhere around the 20 million. We budgeted around 20 million in revenues, GRT revenues coming into the fund for FY20.
Well, we really need to look pretty closely at that, I think, and really see what the real numbers are and how much is spoken for, and obviously establish some sort of policy, perhaps, of what a reserve might look like within 3102, because it sounds as like we've got a fair amount of money. We certainly have a lot of needs in capital projects, no question about that. Everybody understands that. So I really want to make sure that any money we do generate is put into service with an adequate reserve. So we could look at that much more closely, and probably starting with Public Works, I think, or hand in hand with Finance and Public Works.
Councilor Harris.
Yeah, I just had another question for Mr. Romero. I don't see the Arroyo Chamisa Crossing project on here. We know that we're moving forward, approximate $250,000 coming out of impact fees. No, that's Arroyo Chamisa East is a rollover project for the most part. But I don't think I saw the crossing project. Did I miss that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, give me 1 second. We inadvertently omitted that project from this list.
Pardon?
We inadvertently omitted that project from this list. I think I had assumed Arroyo Chamisa East was that, and it is not.
Okay. Yeah, so, and actually that begs the question, are there other projects that are coming out of impact fee monies that should be identified? It's just a separate revenue stream for capital projects. And so certainly to me, you know, that's an important one, and perhaps dollar-wise, the most significant drawdown on the impact fee fund, but if we could expand your spreadsheet to include that.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Councilor Harris, and then, for clarification, again, it's only for funds that have already been appropriated.
Yeah.
So other than that omission, all the other ones that were funded either fully or partially from the impact fee fund this past year or before are included.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. We'll get that on, and anyway, that's what I have, Chair.
Romero Worth.
Is it possible to get a list of the small sidewalk projects that total $462,000 from the rollover money? I'd just be curious. I have a couple constituents who've been complaining about sidewalks. Just curious if those areas are on this list.
Councilor, we had presented a while back a list to council. We can come back, if it's appropriate, maybe to the Public Works Committee, or I can bring it back to Finance, or just email it to you guys and give the list that was vetted by council at one time.
Yeah, and I don't sit on Public Works, so I probably didn't see it, but if there's a list out there, I'd love to just take an eyeball of it.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, I'll send
I
that.
don't think, is that the way you say that? Eyeball it, not take an eyeball
Please
of
send
it.
it to the, probably send it to the whole
I'll
council.
put my eyes on it.
Thank you, John.
Councilor Harris, do you have another question?
Yeah, this is for Mr. Munoz, because I thought I saw maybe in the budget book that there's monies, perhaps it's more just in your direct Parks and Rec budget for kind of detail work at various parks. Do you have other capital monies within your budget other than, or what do you have in your budget for capital projects?
Mr. Chair, City Councilors, Councilor Harris, are you talking about, you're talking aside from the maintenance budget, just to clarify the question?
Well, again, I guess this is from memory, and so this goes back last week. I'm just wondering to what degree you have any, removed room to move contingency within the Parks and Rec budget to address, for the most part, smaller projects, and several come to mind just in District 4.
Yeah, I can take that back and give you a breakdown of what budget we might have to work incidental. Because I know we do projects ad hoc at times.
So, if I may, here's an example. And I talked to a neighbor today, and Councilor Vigil-Copper and I live in the same neighborhood, wonderful neighborhood. We've got a small little passive park, 2 picnic tables, 2 trash cans, and a little trail. It's very sweet. We love to have a shade structure.
Okay.
So
okay.
in the parks
Okay,
in the parks bond there was a shade structure identified for $5,000. And actually, I mean, it is very nice because it's at the upper end, so there's handicap access. I mean, it's really a fully accessible little spot to relax. Shade structure would be good. And this is the type of thing that I'm wondering about. That's an example that I'm very familiar with, and I'm sure there's others.
Mr. Chair, City Councilors, Councilor Harris, we'll go back and look at that. I do remember seeing that line item somewhere on the shade structure.
Yes, sir. Okay.
For some specific parks, but I'll look it up. We'll look it up.
So, I'll be quiet. I was
gonna Ms. McCoy, I want to go back to our budget approval calendar. So we completed all of the departments. We have the capital budget, but what is the plan for taking the budget forward to City Council, and will that be a public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, we plan to take the operating budget that you have approved over the series of hearings we've had for the last 2 weeks to the City Council on May 8th, so next Wednesday. There will be a time for a a public hearing, public comment, and a vote on that same day.
On May 8th, so
On
we're
May 8th.
planning on approving the final budget on May 8th.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Is there time to hear the capital budget at Public Works before the 8th?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the Public Works Committee does meet on Monday, May 6th.
Okay, because it didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think last year we never approved the capital budget, did we?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, and that has provided difficulties every time that we need to accept funding, or we had to come to council every 2 weeks to receive that approval. Whereas if we bring you the capital budget through, the series of committee approvals, if you want it to be heard in front of Public Works, we can do that, and that way we can hit the ground running at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Ms. Wheeler, did you have a comment?
Chairman, Finance Director, the agenda's already published for the Public Works Committee meeting on Monday night. It was published today. So I'm not sure if it's sort of an informal discussion as like a matter from staff or a matter from the chair that we could do.
Because again, my concern is I don't want to, I would like to have a budget approved after May 8th that includes a capital budget, but I don't want, we do need to have the discussion with Public Works at least.
Mr. Chair, Councilors, I think we can change the agenda because it's over 72 hours out.
Mr. Chairman, we could also have the capital budget approved at the last governing body meeting, which I believe is on May 29th.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my next question is there a need for us to meet on Monday? We've completed all of the departments. I think we make one motion to approve the entire budget excluding capital. But there's no department budgets to be heard on Monday.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
So we could make a motion this afternoon to approve the entire budget excluding capital, and we'll be done with our hearings. Yes.
I think we still have some items to address from that memo, so I would like to meet on Monday.
Okay. Councilor Harris, okay.
Yeah, I would
I'm
agree with
waiting
that.
to know about the DWI program. That may, depending on what we get back on that, I may bring an amendment to the police budget.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to avoid, though, is we spent a lot of time on these departments. We had motions, we had seconds, we had approvals.
But we also didn't have all the information to make some decisions.
We shouldn't have voted for the motions then.
Well, if I may.
Yes, Councilor Harris.
High on my list, top of my list, is validation of the projected 30% increase of property tax. And we've not seen that as yet. And so,
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, we did provide that in the packet of information that was handed out yesterday at the end of the hearing. It was one of the memos included. And just to clarify, it was a 30% increase over the budgeted level of $10 million for the current year, which was
we'll meet on Monday. Okay. But what I don't want to do is necessarily go back into every single department and redo the hearings that we just had. So do we want to? So how do we want to? What should we do on Monday so that we have a structure? Right. That's. Are there so specifically? Or Ms. McCoy, do you want you and I get together tomorrow? We'll come up with an agenda for Monday. We'll email it to the committee members, and if we've missed something, let us know, and we can. Because I would like to have some kind of agenda on Monday.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we take items for the agenda now, and then we meet. Tomorrow is Friday, and we would have to post the agenda tomorrow for the Monday meeting.
Does the committee want to give ideas now or suggestions now for Monday? Councilor Harris.
Well, I have a suggestion because I don't doubt what Ms. McCoy said about responding. In the two packets that I have, and we've gotten a lot of information, along the way. So I've got April 25th and I've got May 1st. Was there another packet of responses that I missed?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, it is in the May 1st packet. It is item number 6. These are not sub-page numbered, they're not paginated, but it is one of the items towards the end.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilor Harris, what was your suggestion for Monday?
Well, actually, I just wanted confirmation, first of all, that I had the 2 response packets. That was my first question. And I'm thinking through, I have to tell you the truth, I need to go back and look at my notes a little bit.
Okay.
But I can do that and have something by tomorrow morning.
Yeah, if you could email us what you would like to cover on Monday. If you could email us by tomorrow.
Yeah, I will.
I will take emails from everybody, but I will decide what we hear and what we don't. Because there's still a public hearing at council.
Fine.
And
Mr. Chair, on that point, there's a public hearing on Monday.
do we have to have the public hearing Monday?
Isn't it advertised as such?
Mr. Chairman, that is up to the pleasure of the committee. We are not required to have a public hearing on Monday
'Cause
in the
we're having
Finance
one
Committee. We will be having one at the governing body meeting on Wednesday.
Will you amend the agenda to remove the public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I will.
Day-to-day? So that, nope, so it's clear that we're not having a public hearing on Monday.
Sure.
Yes, Councilor Lindell.
We do have a number of items from yesterday that came on that memo. Follow-up still pending. And I don't want to put undue pressure on, as Ms. McCoy said, she directs these to departments and they need to answer them. It's really not up to finance to come up with all of these answers. But these are the items that we would like to know about. So I think that this is a sizable agenda for Monday.
With what we already have.
Correct.
Okay, and is your DWI question on?
It is on there.
Okay. Okay, so if we could take one last look at that over the next 24 hours, and if there is something that you think we need to cover, I'd be willing to consider it. Counselor,
and
that
Mr.
isn't on that list, Counselor.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, just to maybe ease your concern, I don't think there's anything that we haven't flagged that, we're adding to this. It's just, there are a few things that we have asked for information that could affect the budget if we hear something that makes us want to make amendments. So
okay.
I do think it's our responsibility to follow up on that information.
Okay. Counselor Vihil-Coppler.
Mr. Chair, I realize that some of these have already been prepared, these follow-up questions, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's 4:15 and we're going to meet at 8 on Monday, so I'm wondering if it's is it timely?
The agenda says 8 o'clock on Monday, 8 a.m.
Or should we give staff a little bit more time?
What time would the committee like to meet on Monday?
I think
I had this on my schedule for a long time, that it's 8 o'clock on.
I think 8 on Monday's fine.
Counselor Harris?
I mean, a lot of these requests were made days ago, so it's not like there hasn't been time to respond.
Okay, so we'll meet at 8 o'clock on Monday. Anything else, Counselor Vihil-Coppler? Counselor Villarreal, did you have anything?
So the questions we had or information we were seeking for today's sessions that information will be provided when?
We should try to include that too and get those answers by Monday.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll yes. Well, we already have an agenda. We're going to amend it to remove the public hearing because on the agenda it says staff responses to any request for information. So that's generally enough to cover that. Okay, and then again, if there's something that we missed that you think is critical that we deal with on Monday, I'd be happy to consider it. You could email it to myself and Ms. McCoy and the city manager. Okay, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.